Hello, everybody, and welcome to another PmP End of Month review. Here we are. December has come. The Christmas season is here, and we're reviewing these submissions from the month of November in the PmP Painters Motivating Painters Google Plus Hobby Community. We're still around in Google Plus for now. We'll see how long that lasts. But at any rate, this is our community all about taking your next step on your personal journey in the hobby from newbie to master. We welcome everybody to get together, share their work, and make pledges and share their finished products and receive constructive feedback on what they're doing, what they did well, and what they can do to improve and take their own next steps. I'm joined, as always, by my I don't know what I want to call it, illustrious companions. I was trying to find a term big enough, and that's going to have to do.
Fat.
Indeed. Eric and Kieran. Eric, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Doing great. Excited to take a look at the stuff that's before us. Get to talk a little bit about painting, a little bit about converting, a little bit about being shameless hobbyists.
There you go. Kieran, how about yourself, man? How you doing?
Well, that's my favorite part about being a hobbyist is being shameless. So I echo that.
It does help. One should be shameless in their hobby. I agree. If you want to join us on your own personal journey, why, you can look down below, and there in the description, guess what? It's a link. You can click that and join up. As well, I will also say that we get together and we do these reviews once a month, and I certainly enjoy them. I like doing them. But the real people who make the community vibrant are all of you who are commenting, who are answering questions, who are stepping up every time somebody posts. Keep that up. I try to do it, and I see lots of people try to do it. Nothing warms my heart than when I come into a post 30 minutes after I got the email or something to comment, and there's already 4 or 5 comments. That's wonderful. That is what makes this community great. Sharing that positivity, that love of the hobby, offering feedback, offering suggestions, answering questions. Keep that going. So thank you, everybody who's doing that. All right. Gentlemen, anything else you want to share before we begin the review?
Oh, let's jump in.
Ready to launch.
All right. Well, then let me lock on myself. And let me share my screen here. All right. That coming through okay?
You're on.
That's great.
Okie dokie. So, let's see. We begin with Caspian Cleason's dwarf here. So, Eric, what do you got?
So Caspian's asking, how do I push this guy to the next level? He's taken the white dwarf from kind of the Space Marine, I think came out a couple years ago as a anniversary model. And he wants to take it to the next level. So I think the first thing to look at and to celebrate is you've got some clean blocking with the reds and the browns and the grays on the hair. I think you did a good job in your color selection. The hair has kind of a slightly blue tint to it. So going kind of like a silver gray rather than just going kind of a dull black gray. So I think all those things are good choices. Really good work on the jewels, the gems that are, you've got that right, the point of light going in at the top and the kind of colored light coming out the bottom of the gem, etc. So a lot of good things going on there. As we flip around, I think we'll notice, good coverage, good blocking, etc., and some decent line highlighting. I would say, going back to the first image, where you're going to want, if you're going to want to take it to the next level, I think the line highlighting is going to be some of what you want to do. Kind of just continue to help to clean that up and straighten that up, etc. Get consistent kind of edges and that sort of stuff. And I'd say where I'm seeing it the most, if we could zoom in on his face again, would be, you look at this, at the beard in particular, and you see where the braids are, that it kind of just turns into the dry brushing or the brush strokes on there kind of just blend together. So all of the recesses are kind of, all the depth is kind of taken out in those spots, and it kind of just looks like springs or coils in that location. And so the thing I would do, so what you want to do is get, you probably want water down your paints a little bit more as you're going at these, and you may want to take a few more layers on it. So what I would suggest you do for this particular thing would be take the wash that you used, or a similar kind of blue-black wash, and wash it down again, just the beard, and it's going to find its way into those recesses. You could even take a really a small brush and kind of blacklight that, and so you get the shadows just right into those. So you use the brush to deliver that wash right into those recesses, but you can also just wash the whole thing over and let them wash in there, and that's going to separate out that detail again. It's going to make it pop out. It will take your brightest every bit of your tone, and it will bring it back down, so one layer, and that'll kind of do some blending, which would be really nice. But then you would take your, if you don't have a really fine brush, then I'd get, maybe go pick one up that can have a nice tip to it. And with the watered down, that gray, or the kind of close to white, but not quite white, start layering it back up and try to work on kind of your fine detail. This model has a lot of that in the hair and in those braids, etc. And this beard is really the centerpiece of this model, and kind of what this character is known for, is a big old white beard. And so that would be one area to look at. Another area, and this is with reds in general, is that, and I think blues can do this too, is they can get really flat when they're just, when it's just kind of, you got your red painted on, and then you do a highlight, or just a edge highlight. And so what you could do in your next model, as you're looking at, if you wanted to tackle this model, you could. Let's see if we've got a left hand look at this guy, or one of the shoulder pads. Maybe either one, left or right. Okay, there we've got a black shoulder pad. I would rather go to a different one. That one's going to be a little bit more difficult maybe at this. So this is a good spot. So if you look here, and this is something that you could do easily to touch it up, that shoulder pad that's closest to us, if you would paint over that emblem, the gold emblem, with the red, and do a little bit of wet blending up into maybe a crimson, or what do we got? A scarlet color, and just a little bit lighter red, a little bit more brighter red, but keeping the red down below darker, and kind of blend up into that. And an easy way to do that could also be to take a dry brush and kind of just stroke down with that brighter red, and get it down, and then get a little bit of the crimson or the darker red, and dry brush back up, kind of try and get a blend, and then do a wash over that, or a glaze over that, to blend the two together. But when you've got these big round shoulder pads, and you see that not the barrel itself, but the red in front of the barrel on either side, things like that, and you can start seeing that, armor is made up of a bunch of curves, which almost automatically means that one part is going to be more in the light than other parts. And so being able to get those kind of directional highlights would be kind of another next step. So, all of that leads to just brush control. It leads to, picking out those things. I see the back of that hair there, and you can see where I can tell that you've used your brush to try and lightly hit the tips of those. One of those bristles had too much paint on it, and it dipped down into the recesses, and it got a little glob in there. I've done that. We've all done that, all that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of cleaning those sorts of things up, so that they're not as noticeable, so that those the accidental deposits of paint happen less. So those would be the areas that I would focus on next, because I think those would make this whole thing even more striking. There's always room to add detail to the barrel and the wood, and make the gold and the metallic have more contrast to them. But I would say those would be the areas that I would focus on next.
Right on. Okay.
Okie
dokie. Next up, we have our rock troll. I think this is which one this is.
Stone troll.
Stone troll. There it is. Yeah. Sorry.
Sure. Well, so for those watching at home, what Tam the Third has tried to do here is he's tried to represent a comic book sort of a style, which I guess the common moniker has been known as cell shading. But the imagination and the goal is to do it like it looks on a comic book. So think about that, all of you guys who have had looked at comics or graphic novels in the past, and think about how that kind of sort of changing of color happens throughout a comic, and how you do shading with just inks and a limited color palette. So that's what the goal is here. Now, to do kinds of things, you have to sort of artificially create spots of where the highlight is, where the midtone is, and where the shade is. And predominantly, when you're doing the absolute shade, if you look in a little closer around the belly of this guy, or even on the face of that stone axe, you can see that he's done some kind of just black ink lining. And then once you start to spend more time looking at this, you'll notice that every time something shifts to a different color, there's a hard black line between each of those things. So most obvious on this model is around the claws, all around the face, the eye, etc. His loincloth. Those are all separated by very sharp black. Now, if we flip to the backside image, because he gives us a separate one here, then the other thing that I want to point out is if we look at the rock face, both held in his hand as well as the axe, you can see that he has then also deliberately changed the color of gray when the facet of the stone changes, and put also a black line in there, because that's how comic books work, right? So you put the black line to make sure that you understand that the facet is changing and it's going into something else. So that, I think, sells the idea pretty well. Now, when I get to critiques on this, I got to admit to everybody that I'm pretty new to this. I've really just only been exposed to this in the last few months with this style of painting. A fella named Mike Cousins has been doing lots of this stuff and sharing it around in the communities that I'm part of late. And he's mastering it. He's getting really good at it. So the couple of things that I think I want to add here is there's a number of places where I think that you still continue to do black lining that you haven't, and that will sell the idea a little bit better. One is when you do that sort of shadowing cross hatching, like at the base of the stone facet on this rock here, two direction cross hatching, I think, to me, looks best. So in other words, what I mean here is that Tam has done pretty much just vertical lines to make his shadow there. But you can, if you cross them the other way and do also horizontal lines to cross over and fine ones, I think that sells the idea a little bit better. The other thing I was going to suggest is that throughout the ropes, I think that you also need to do your black lining in there to separate the bands of rope, and give us a clear comic book idea of where that's defined. Throughout most of the rest of it, though, I think that this works for me because you're effectively doing, I can see sort of three different shades of blue when we look at the whole skin as a whole, and getting a more consistent sort of definition of where one band of color begins and ends is the challenge with this. And I think that through practice, we'll kind of get that. And for those that we've talked to about this kind of painting in the past, when you're doing color blends, this is actually kind of the opposite. You're trying to not do color blends in this. You're just trying to make a defined line of where dark blue ends and mid blue begins, and then once again where highlight blue takes over from mid-range blue. And that can also be subject to directional lighting. So if it's coming over the guy's left shoulder, for example, then you can force much more of your highlight on that side, but still make a definition of when that color ends to a new color begins. So again, that's sort of opposite to how we talk about doing soft blends on other models and things like this. But for the purposes of what Tam is trying to explore into here, that's exactly the way it should be. It should go, in my perception. So I guess in conclusion, I want to say, really good effort. I think I'm intrigued by this style of painting. Much like other sort of forced styles of perspective, this one takes a lot of work to get it done on a 3D surface, because you're effectively transferring that 2D style of art onto a 3D model. So as you turn that model around, it might look different. But I think that that'll benefit from a forced lighting perspective in concert with it. So I guess just to drive that last thought home, choose a perspective of which you're going to paint this from. A super bright light from over the left shoulder, for example, just as I said, and then cast all your cell shading in opposition to that. And then you can find a more consistent crossover of the color shifts throughout the model. That's my thoughts about that. Eric or Vince, have you played with this in any way in your experience?
I'm hoping to. Yeah, it's what I like about it is one. So prior to miniatures, I spent a couple of years of my youth as a aspiring comic artist, kind of amateur, just doing stuff with friends and painting or digital coloring, etc. And so really excited to see that some elements of that are translating here, and they're translating in a positive way that I didn't expect. And I think that there's I think there's a really cool space for this. I'd love to see this, throughout a whole army. The other thing too is I think there's really room for this technique as a step, or not to say it's a lesser technique than blending or more, smooth blending, but it feels like something that's really good at helping kind of understand where values and light are, and I think can be a more forgiving step towards, for a new painter. So I think there's a couple things that I really like about it as a style.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, it's one of those things that it is going to look cool in pictures, I think, and it can be tough when it's actually in 3 dimensions. What I'll say is, my advice is, whenever you do a thing like this, you always want to figure out, like, what's the angle you're going to look at the model from, right? What's the primary viewing angle, and make sure you're inclined to go toward that. If you think about, like, and look at reference material, like look at comics and other things that use this sort of style, and really, really look. I want to do a hobby cheating sometime that's called "Look at Something for 10 Minutes." Right. And that's it. It's just literally we sit there and we look at a thing for 10 minutes. I mean, that sounds like a joke, but it's not. Developing a skill to, like, when's the last time you actually sat and looked at a single thing, image that isn't like a television show for 10 minutes? Can you even imagine? That's a long time. But that's what you got to do. You've got to break it down, understand it, get to its constituent parts. So same thing, like really look at every line, how they place it, go back and grab those 90s comics that were really masters of like hard incline placing before they started using, computers to do everything, and understand what those artists were making sort of conscious choices about.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was trying to say, is that you choose that forced perspective from one angle, because you're translating a 2D technique.
Yep.
And it takes a bit of study to figure out how that's going to translate to a 3D surface. Absolutely
agreed. All right, living door. So this is Andy Walker. The idea is that you got these 2 little things you can use in your dungeon or whatever. So you got 2 versions of it, and he wanted to do it in non-metallic metal. And so the door basically activates and then turns from this door to this door as it opens. Neat.
Vince, we should, sorry to interrupt, we should do this as a one of us never lies and one of us always tells the truth and one of us never tells the truth sort of.
Yes. One of us only lies and one of us only tells the truth. Yes, exactly. Go. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I did bring my like giant cod piece for my David Bowie cosplay for this. So I'm ready to go.
That went in your direction. I'm going to be honest.
I can't help it if it's the first thing I think of when you mention Labyrinth. All right. So let's talk about this. Okay. So what we have here is big, sort of non-metallic metal on display is what this was. Like that's the shooting match. I'll give you a single piece of feedback on the not NMM real quickly. The stone should be more varied, try to work some more detail into it. Like you have scratches here, but you didn't bother to like really flesh out what's under those lights, have some more color, depth, things like that in a stone. When you do glowing runes, make sure you cast a little bit of light around through a light glaze and make sure you have the center of them be really hot. So more white blue here toward the center to really get the idea they're glowing. Right now they just look blue. You need to heat up the center. Okay. Non-metallic metal feedback section over. Okay. So now let's talk about this being gold. The problem we have here is we're too brown. And non-metallic metal is a very interesting thing. It can withstand a lot of different colors, but one of the keys is you have to play in the right tone for your, like, let's call it beyond the 10% of highlights down to like your 40% of midtones. And that needs to be a pretty rich ochre. So what I mean by that here is the part of this that sells to me the best is like this right in here and this right in here and here, right? Although this is the best piece right here, okay? Now, this is a rough thing to test on because this isn't a flat surface, right? Like it's clearly made of stone. Like when I zoom in, I can see the stone texture. So that screws with it. And that's one of the lessons about NMM is like, it's really hard to do NMM on a surface that isn't meant to be that, because your eye is really good at picking up inconsistencies. So like, let's just break down this constituent component piece right here. Like we're gonna learn everything off of this single piece, okay? I can see texture in here. If this was actually textured like this, and this was actually gold, then it would not have this highlight, right? I mean, broadly it might, but this part would be yellowish and there'd be a white light catch here. This part would go yellowish and there'd be a white light catch like here. This part would catch a light because it's a depression. This would be darker. It'd look more like this. This little thing would light up. All these little scratches and dents would all catch light and shadow and transition in the same way you're doing this broad sweep, right? And my brain knows that instinctually, subconsciously, even if I'm not aware of it. And so when I see it's not happening, it destroys the illusion, like just like that. Now, let's put that to the side, okay? Let's just talk about the consistency of the color. I need more of this tone coming up here. I have too much browns and too much blacks to be gold, even old gold. You really got to be careful with black in non-metallic metal. It can work, but then you have to do cold gold. So like real, like true dark black should either be like in the minorest recesses of warm gold or a little more spread out, but on cold gold. And you're not cold here. You have warm brown tones and warm ochres, right? Cold gold transitions more from like a weak yellow into like a very soft gray brown tone into like a black. If you go watch like the Painting Buddha video on Korg's Call where Ben Komitz does the gold, he uses a cold gold technique, and that you'll see that what I mean. There's a moment in the video where he compares the warm gold he did on the Stormcast to the cold gold on Korgus, and you'll never see a more blatant like comparison of the two types of gold. So if we're gonna do warm, we need to extend this ochre way up. Like it's got to come up to about here. Okay, so like this whole space, read that as 10% to 40% needs to read as this color. Okay, now the reason I picked this particular one is because you actually came to like pretty pure white here, which I like. Some of these other places you don't, right? Like up here, this would actually be like over here. This would be maybe the strongest light catch on the thing. Because like if the light is coming in like this, at this angle at about 1:30 p.m., which is what you're telling me is happening, this is the strongest point of light on the thing, period. Like wham, that's getting hit directly. High point, end of the light catch. Okay. So like you want to make sure that when you stretch out to your highlights, you have it accurately reflecting what's going on. And that's the same thing I'd say, like, so bracking back out, we're not really heating the light here, right? Because like when we have this beard, it's just as lit here as here, but yet you've told me this light is coming from this angle. You told me that when you decided to run a shadow here against this light, right? Because if it was coming from directly above, it would be spilling over both of these equally. And this would be like, what you'd actually get is this would be a, let's call it 70% shadow, and your light point would fall about right here, right? If this was a noon light source, okay? Because it ironically, non-metallic metal will spill some down the side. It wouldn't, you'd have a pseudo shadow right here. So you've given me this, like you're not holistic in your light placement is what I mean. What we should have is this should be like yellowish white coming to a bright spot here. And then this should kind of fade, right? And be not as bright. Same here. We jump from like pure white out to brown too quickly, kind of all over the thing. We need more of that mid-tone yellow out here within. In the same space, things like this underneath here where his mouth is open, the only thing that's hitting this is reflected light. So it's not going to go white. Like you took all your highlights equidistant, even when we need to think about reflected light. So light comes down, hits the ground, bounces back up, hits this guy's tooth. Okay, I buy that. There would be a light here, but it wouldn't hit white, right? Because we have a more diffuse reflected light. So this should be lit, but it should be like more yellow white, more pushed down into, into a deeper color. Kind of the same everywhere, right? Like with these other points, we want to spread these out. We don't want your white is a bit too strong in all these places. We need to like back that out. Really get that mostly down into yellow, use the white constructively. The last thing I'll say is when you do these like scratches and dents and stuff, make sure your highlight side is consistent. It's not here. You've told me the light's coming from above at this direction with this scratch, but then this when you put the light catch on this side, right? Telling me the light is actually coming from this direction, like from 5 o'clock. So you need to be consistent with where your light catches are. Okay. Yeah, there you go. That's a long diatribe on non-metallic metal. Short answer, more ochre, spread out your color, less white, more careful white placement, and think about your reflected lights very carefully. And make sure you bring those down a notch because they shouldn't hit as high. There you go. Anything you wanted to add there, gentlemen?
Oh, that's some deep wisdom. Well put, Vince.
I got nothing.
All right. Well, then let's keep moving. Okay. So next up, we have an awesome Hobgoblin conversion from Just Tim. I'm going to flip quickly through my own piece here. Then we've got some Death Guard I'm going to take. And then we have a big old Morathi, the Shadow Queen. All right. So start with the Hobgoblin. By the way, I love how Tim makes these nice composite pictures for us. Like, just Tim, you're my hero, buddy. Just for this alone, I want you to know that.
No, it is great being able to be able to reference all the angles.
I know, right? It's so nice.
Now do it landscape, please. Just so really cool idea of conversion here. I think I saw this when you posted it, but maybe briefly because I was working on some Hellions not too long ago. I was like, and my son's, kind of big into comic books these days, or at least superheroes. And so I was like, I wonder if we could do a Hobgoblin. So I must have been seeing this one. And I really like what you've achieved. I immediately assumed that this was maybe like a HeroClix or a, something that was produced by another company. Because I think you've done a great job of putting the right pieces together for this to sell as a Marvel or some version of the Marvel, villain Hobgoblin. So spot on there. I mean, you've found the right bits, you've put them together, and they pass as a produced model, in my opinion. A couple of things that I'm seeing. Could we zoom in? Let's just zoom into the lower right, because that shows some front and a few other things. It does look like what we've got is you've got great blocking. You've got the the colors you're looking for. I love the choice of you put a list together of and if you want to go check out all the like 7 or 8 different kits that he pulled pieces from. Go check it out. And you know, even to the breastplate having that kind of bat-like, or you know, kind of vampiric, or at least just dark kind of pattern is really great for this, and those big leggings, etc. The one piece that is kind of breaking this for me, and it's, you know, some might think the stand, because there's definitely some ways that you could be showing this guy, you know, kind of flying through air without using a clear plastic stand, and especially with you know, different types of headstones and, you know, monument stones, etc. But for me, the break in the model is the cape. Now, some of the capes, I can't remember. Let me see if I can remember which one this is. The cape is from. Back part, torso, and cloak is a Shadow Warriors. And I'm not as familiar with these guys. Is anybody familiar with which kit this is? This is a GW kit?
Yeah, the Shadow Warrior kit, like the you know, the Shadow Warriors, like the high elf guys.
The high elf. Okay. So another option for this would have been, I believe it is the Dark Riders, which is a dark elf kit, where the cape is flowing backwards, is kind of more horizontal. And so with this guy, since he's flying through the air, having the cape being kind of plastered to his back kills some of the movement in the conversion. So whenever you're you know, putting the bits together and you're looking for the right pieces, thinking about, well, how does it look like they're flying, etc. Now, maybe this is a super heavy cape and he's moving really slow, but in this case, I think a cape that was kind of longer, or not longer, but more horizontal, more flowing, would give you the movement that this model, I think, begs for. Now, that being said, like I said, I think it passes. I don't think most models that are created, you know, hit all. You know, I think they're all missing some beats when it comes to movement, etc. But so I think that's great. You know, again, I love a lot of that stuff. Your choice of pieces to put together is really good. Then the next thing I would say is looking at your paint specifically. You've got your colors blocked really well. You've got a wash on them to get into the recesses, but we've got a lot of odd pooling and kind of watermarks that are breaking kind of the paint of this, or the, you know, kind of ruining the sculpts and that sort of stuff. And you can see this primarily on the cape. A lot of times on capes, those flat surfaces are not so flat, and so it pools and makes what kind of almost more like watermarks in the capes. And not only are those just kind of ruin the flow of the cape. So on this lower left one, you've got those 2 spots on the left corner. That upper one just feels like it shouldn't be there. Like that cape feels like it's got a big dent there, but at the same time, that left line is perfectly straight. So it just starts kind of not looking great. And then on the inside of the cape, the lower right one, it just looks muddy and dirty in there. But at this scale, it looks like a small miniature that's muddy and dirty, rather than a life-size miniature that has some dirt or weathering on it. So really gotta, you know, I would go back in there with the highlights, or with your base color, kind of smooth out some of those, start getting into some highlights, etc. Whether that's a blend into something brighter towards the bottom of the cape because it's starting to flare up a little bit, or that's just getting some good line highlights, etc., edge highlights, etc. So, and same with the blue. You know, I think the blue actually ended up a little bit better with its with the wash and some of those recesses, creating some tones, and now going back in with line highlights to catch some of the topmost areas of the cloth that would have some light reflecting, you know, down on it, or shining down on it. Some of that chest plate that would have some harder edges on it. I can't tell because I don't think we can zoom in far enough. The red emblem seems to have gotten the best treatment, with being edge shadowed, and then having kind of some really good highs and darks of the red. So all in all, I think you've definitely found some really good options for the models and for the bits, and put them together in a way that is definitely believable as a like a HeroClix type or a model of the Hobgoblin, and I think it's really well done. So a little more on the paint. Maybe missed a beat with the cape being more flowy, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. Those are my thoughts.
Right on. Okay. So next up, I want to take everybody through just a project that I did recently because I thought it'd be fun to do so, just for various things I want to talk about. So this is my Slaanesh Archaon, Archael. This was a model done out of spite for people who praise Alarielle, and I thought it'd be fun to turn Alarielle into a version of Slaanesh. And the real reason I wanted to talk about this model is because I just want to say, if you've got some crazy ideas, don't be afraid of them. Like, this was a crazy idea that popped in my head, I don't know, 2.5 years ago or something at Holy Havoc. And I kind of let it stew for a little while until I refined it. And then eventually just said, you know what, let's do this, put the kits together and started seeing what works. And I didn't try to plan everything out. Like, I had the rough idea the tentacles would fit, but I didn't know how well they would fit. I didn't measure everything out. I just kind of started sticking it on there. And then I let the green stuff do the work and cover it over and found bits that fit and just kind of let the project find its way. It took a little while and it took some stop starts and I had to be constantly reevaluating what I was doing. But in the end, I'm actually really happy with how it came out. So my point is that, and every bit of this has just different things I was playing around with and trying, from different experimentations on what vines on the building look like, to if we come down here, you'll see I've got some flowered vines growing on the building, to bring color down, up to just different conversions and experiments in translucent cloth, to the freehand pattern in the wings, just blood spatters. You can't see it, but I tried to do different interesting blood spatters. I have a handprint being drugged down the other wall here on the other side. I didn't get a photo of it. It's kind of on this back of this hidden wall. When you have opportunities to play around, don't be afraid. Don't worry about it. Just play with something. Try new stuff. Especially if you're doing a big model. You've got space to play around. You can try new little things and experiment and see what you like. So obviously that's Archael herself. And then from below, so you can see how that all came out. And then that's her compared to the Chaos Lord of Slaanesh. That's the size difference there. So
I do feel like you've hit a tipping point where the base is larger than the model.
It's close. It's close. I did measure it. She is slightly taller than the base. But yes.
But the mass, maybe.
It's pushing it. I'm pushing good sense here. Yeah, that's probably a good moment to talk about this. You want to be careful putting models on bases that are bigger than them. If the proportionality is such that the base takes up more volume than the model, it will look bad. I am pushing it to an absolute limit here. And probably maybe a step on the wrong side of the line, to be honest. But
what I mostly kid on that. I think
no, you're not wrong.
Obviously, it's a good size, but I mean, Archaon's huge, and I think you've in past ones you've done. Obviously having weight on that bottom when you've got something that tall is important as well. This I haven't seen this in person, but I'm imagining that it's got.
But you will
weight down below. I can't wait. I mean, I think it's impressive. I think looking and seeing, that face, those tentacles, this version of it, nobody's done it yet, and somebody was bound to. I'm glad that you, look at those two together. So I think it's really great.
Yeah, I just said the point being, don't let fear stop you, even on expensive kits, right? I see a lot of people talk about how oh, this kit's really expensive, I didn't want to ruin it. Making it your own isn't ruining it. You certainly aren't going to ruin anything with paint. I was just cutting off pieces and hacking things up. And, you can fix it. You've got bits. You can repair things. It's very hard not to be able to undo something.
I can reflect that. I was having that exact conversation with a local hobbyist about the paralysis of, I'm probably not going to be able to pull that off so therefore I won't try. And that happens in all skills in life. And we just kind of reminded ourselves when we were having that conversation that, well, you suck at everything before you try things.
That's right. Yep. Failing at something is the first step to being pretty okay at something. That's right. So this is a fun piece. Yeah, this one's 19 or like 18 inches tall. She's like 21 and a half or something like that, I think. I don't know. It seems like a bigger difference than that, but maybe he's 17 and she's 21 and a half. I don't remember exactly, but I know she's 21 and a half inches tall. So there you go. And there's her from behind. But it was a lot of fun. And I look forward to her leading my new legions of Slaanesh when they become available very soon. So, okay. So enough of that. Now let's talk about Alan Thomas and his Death Watch. He tried to sneak in every single technique he's not comfortable with yet, like feathering, blending white, freehand, minor OSL, and metal. Okay. So we got a lot of different elements going on here. Let's take a look and give some general feedback. Okay. So I'm going to actually flip over here first because this is where we get the cape and the freehand, and this is a primary element. All right. So let's talk about the white. Yeah, pretty good. I think the white looks pretty smooth. We could do a little bit more smoothing in the shadows of some softer glazes that get feathered out a little more. But overall, it's a nice, creamy, smooth white. I don't really see much in the way of problems with it. I think you came out pretty well there. Now, the shoulder blade, shoulder pad. Let's look at this guy, see if I can get a good side shot of the shoulder pad. Nope. Nope. Okay. So we'll have to go with that one. Shoulder pad, not so much. Look at how creamy and smooth this looks to how this looks, right? Where we've got this chalkiness. That's because here you went with a warm near white that's naturally much smoother because it has some yellows and browns in it to achieve this color, versus here you went for the dead white. Stay away from dead white unless you're using like a heavy body acrylic or ink or stuff like that. That's going to also smooth it out. And make sure you underpaint it first, not with any, like you've got to build up to it. Okay. And the difference is never more stark than right here. This looks really nice and smooth. This looks splotchy and chalky. And the difference there is because of the paint you chose and the way it was applied. Okay. All right. So freehand image. I've done this eye myself a few times. So I'm very familiar with this sort of like inquisitorial symbol. My advice here is a few different things. First off, overall, not too bad. Looks good. You want to make sure you kind of bring your stuff into proportion a little bit. Like your top part here is a little fat. It kind of goes thin down here at the bottom. So like when you're doing your initial sketch of this thing on the back of the cloak, make sure you step back and look at it and figure out that it's correctly proportioned and where you want. Like the little wingies on the side feel a little small, the little eye on the top feel a little small, and then it kind of has this angle to it. And you can balance that out if you step back. Like, and what's great about this is because you have a pretty flat white around the cape. If you get too wide with your initial sketch, it's easy peasy to cover up because you just run more of the white over the side. Done. Piece of cake. But all in all, this looks pretty good. Again, I would smooth out some of, like, your biggest challenge here is one thing. And I see it in the black lines here. I see it in the red lines here. I see it here. And that is our paint wasn't flowing smooth enough. You're doing freehand with something the consistency of paint, and you're getting uneven line work. You need to have some flow improver, and you need to make sure you're wicking off your excess, and you've got to get that paint to act like ink. Anytime I see, I can spot that very clearly because, again, think of putting acrylic paint in a pen. How well is that ink going to flow out of that, or that paint going to flow out of that pen? The answer, not at all. It's just going to clog the pen, and the pen's dead. That's because it's the same for your brush. If you put a thick paint on the end of your brush and then try to draw a line, it's not going to go where you want. It's not meant to do that. Hence why you want to take paint plus a little ink, get a little flow improver in there, and so on and so forth. I have a video called How to Paint Sharp Thin Lines, which that's what you'll want to reference there. Okay, so that out of the way. Let's talk about some things like glowing and stuff like that. We've got some nice little effects down here with like the red glowing sort of, I don't know, it's like cop light that's on the floor here. I assume it's like a little warning light. Yeah, that's fine enough. I like the glow of the thing quite a bit. You did a nice job there of having the dark spot and then the light on the side. That actually looks really nice. Your red glow you're casting here needs to get weaker, faster, and have light catches here on the side. So this is steel, right? Like he's walking on steel is what I assume. Like this looks like a metal grating. So if this was steel, light catches on the corners of steel. So hence each one of these little divots in the floor should be catching a brighter, sharper version of that red light. Like OSL is really, really complicated because it has to sell like every way the light would work, or else your brain immediately goes, nope, that's not actually glowing. So just think about that and that kind of thing. The other elements are all looking pretty nice. You've got some good shading on your metals. Your edge highlighting is suffering from kind of a little bit of the same thing that we talked about before. So I'd sharpen a little of those up. Because when you're dealing with like Death Guard and you have this very black armor, you want to make sure you got some decent edge highlights on there. Kudos on your faces. I think they look quite nice. You may want to get a little bit deeper, darker lines around the eyes here. This one actually looks right. This one looks a little too surprised still. But the faces look nice. You got good color variation in there. I enjoy that. The color application on like the gun and the underside of the cloak looks really good. So I dig that. Yeah, all in all, cool stuff, man. All right.
The other couple bits I like about that is his blowout of the muzzle on this melta gun, especially.
Oh yeah, good call. I didn't talk
really
about
good.
it. Yes, it's done really well. Yeah.
Yeah, and a little bit of weathering elsewhere on the bases actually turned out nice.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay. Next
we're going to look at some big monstrosity.
Oh yeah, Morathi, the Shadow
This is
Queen.
done by Mahai. And a couple of tidbits about this. Actually, if you folks at home go scroll back into the end of month submit and look at the way that he's presented his questions and comments, he's sort of done a little bit of his own self-critique that is going to be useful for us to build on. So first thing to share with everybody who's watching at home is he did this in 4 hours. So pretty triumphant. And he was thinking about things like color balance and composition. But then he's got a couple of self-critiques, which we'll get into as well. But let's start with the overall 3 feet away shot, which he feels, which is exactly his words. He said it looked good from 3 feet away, and I think that's absolutely accurate. I think that the color balance is good, and what we mean by that, of course, is we've got orange and red that is built around the wings and also trails down onto the snake body as well. So we got something down there. So you have that triangulation. Similarly, because he's used purple as his alternate flesh color on Morathi's wings and worked it in a couple other places, it was important for him to bring purple down to the base as well, which he's done in the form of those glowing crystals. Actually, while we're on the crystals, one thing that I want to quickly mention about that is that it just, there's one part of it that seems a little bit odd to me, Mahai, is that there is no bright light spot of that crystal that's casting the light. I mean, I get it from your overblast here that's what you're trying to sell, and the blowout of light as it diffuses looks good. It could probably be a little bit more light towards the center where the crystal is planted, but also within the crystal, even if it's something not real big, we should get some kind of idea that there's a bright spot of light in there. Now, let's move through and, actually, no, let's talk about this before we go. His runes that he's portrayed on the front of her scales looks really sweet. I think that's come out pretty sharp. And can you give us a zoom on that one, Mr. Vince? I'm talking about the runes on the lower end of her. There we go. Yeah, so this has turned out really sharp just by doing it white in there. I think if I was to try this another way, I wonder if this might appear a little bit more magical if you had put a little touch of orange in there as well, because you've got a little bit of emanating light around there. And that could have been an idea. Anyway, that's minor, just a subtle suggestion. Okay, so zooming back out, the other things that Mahai wanted to talk about was his wings and the membranes and bone structure of the wings. So let's spin around to a backside shot, actually. Let's look at those. Okay. So what I was saying before is he's used a purple tone as his otherworldly flesh for the wings on Morathi, and the same kind of color has come across through the bone structure that supports the wings and the membranes. I see what you mean. I think that you've just taken 2 steps on these things, and I think that it could use a third or a fourth step. The third step being another level of highlight on some of the more featured places, like across the shoulders, the knuckles, I guess we're going to call them, and as well as the sort of musculature that goes across her arms. I think that those places especially could benefit from it. And then when it carries through to the bone membrane, I think the sensibility is that has to try to appear a little bit less fleshy and a little bit more bone color. And that's especially prominent to me in this bone spur that comes off of her elbow. Like it certainly is, to me, it reads as a different material. So I think I'd like to see that a little bit different. Even if it is flesh colored, I think that it would go a whole lot more pale, is the way I imagine it. And I think that would define it a little bit better. When you carry that over through the separation of the wing panels, I think that will define those a little bit better as well. So that's my suggestion there, is to have gone more pale in that space. The other thing I want to talk about while we're here on the back is this red cloak of hers. I do understand that oftentimes photography can flatten out red, but just the same, even if it is, this feels way too much samey. I think that you need to do this justice, just like you've done through the wings, and you traversed a long way to show the shape and exaggerate the shape of your wings and the membranes within. I think similarly, this fabric also needs your attention to make that look with more contrast, as we say many times. You've done it in the scales, obviously, because that's easier. You've done it on the snakes as well, in the same kind of color spectrum, and I think that cloak needs it as well. What else can we talk about here? Let's also talk about the runes that you've done on the wings. I think I like 2/3 of those. I like the fine runes that you've done, and you've emulated and matched them on both panels from left and right. Whatever that down arrow is, whatever symbol that is, I think is too heavy, and I don't think it's benefiting the look of the model. I don't know in Dark Elf lore if that's an important part of the whole trio of symbols that you've done there.
That's just Morathi saying you're going down.
Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then yeah, but that's just my impression of it. I don't think that heavy thing there does anything to augment what you've done around it. What else do we want to talk about here? Let's flip back around to the front side, if you can. And he's got a couple other frames that maybe get a little bit tighter on Morathi herself. But even this one will do. So the triumph of this model, I think, is actually Morathi's flesh tone. How you've gotten quite a number of levels of color depth in there. The shadows in that violet color show off really well. You've gotten that evil expression in her eyes, and pulled off some violet to show her raging eyebrows as well. So I think that this is the best part of what you've done on this model. The gemstones that you've pulled off there in violet, I think that they read pretty well as well. She's got one on her brow, but a couple of those around the belt as well. And you've even cast a little bit of purple into the metallic itself down in that space, and a little bit of bluish tint in the, I guess, array of her crown. So I like that you've incorporated a little bit of color in there. But I think the placement of metallics, which plagues many of us, is something that you just got to spend some time at. And I don't think that this is much of a critique. I think the initial laydown of it for your time spent and what you've gotten out of this model is an absolute triumph. For you to come from 0 to this in 4 hours is a real tremendous effort. But if you do go back and spend more time on it, I think that you redo the metallics and think about where the light capture and the shadows really lie. And I think that you'll find that you can sharpen that up and give it a more realistic look. But my closing thoughts are pretty tremendous for 4 hours spent. And as a tabletop piece, this is going to still stun some people, even for a 4-hour effort. So be pleased with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, my God, that is ridiculously good work for that amount of time. Good God Almighty. Okay, well done, sir. All right, I hope to see more. Maybe take 8 hours. Go nuts. Really, really dive in.
What do you do with double your time, Ahai?
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Next up, we've got some corn and some orcs from Nick. We've got Sparker, who brings us something from Conquest, and John Bork, who just started out in the hobby. So I thought maybe we do this. Eric, why don't you take John Bork's model here?
Yeah.
I'll take Sparker's Conquest guy, and then Kieran, if you want to close us out talking about some Shadespire crews, because I think you may have had some experience, especially with this first crew, the Corn Bros, as they're so affectionately known. All right, so let's start out with John Bork.
Yeah. All right. So I believe this is a War Machine model. I can usually tell just by kind of just design, and some areas are thicker, like shields, etc. Real cool model. I think you've picked some really great colors to help this fantasy model, kind of pop and do some things of that nature. You've got a really cool base. Looks like some pine bark, etc. And I do like where you've got kind of grass growing up around it. This big rock's kind of sitting out there, and we've got grass growing near it, and it's in a lush area. I think you could add some small green dry rush in a few spots to kind of give it some mossy texture, or something's growing on it. But I think there's some good things there. So let's talk about some of the different aspects. You've got some great blending going on with your blue cloth. It's really fun seeing you work that in the big areas like the cloth, and then on the armor in those kind of even the smallest areas, trying to kind of blend it from the orange up to the yellow. And I think that's really good. Wanting to have kind of a bigger range in there with the yellow. I would say though that, and so in this case it reads very much, I think, like fire, where it's kind of orange and yellow, as opposed to either being orange that's been highlighted with yellow, or yellow that has a bit of orange shadow to it. So part of me is wondering if it wouldn't benefit, if you're going for yellow armor, to tone down the orange a little bit, let the yellow chase it down into the recesses a bit more, so that the yellow has the opportunity to kind of to again take on the majority of that space. So for instance, those pauldrons, that orange comes up about halfway up on the pauldron. If you could take that orange down a little bit, or let it kind of hang around the edges or where there's shadow, and then let the yellow take the center, that would probably help the yellow kind of be, hey, this is yellow kind of thing. And similar to the kind of pauldrons that are coming off of the horse, that armor in the front by its leg, with the cross in it, etc. There's a lot of dark orange in there, and so being and kind of up in front of the knight on the back of the horse. Again, let the orange chase, or the yellow chase the orange down into the recesses a bit more. So the yellow is central in every panel and covers the most space, and then the orange is much more of a supporting role. So that's one thought I'd have. I mean, yellow is a hard one. Everyone knows it is. Orange is also a hard one. I think orange, often you have to go down into some red tones, and I think maybe that some of it is that maybe too, because you're going with yellow, some of your orange recesses get a little too much into what looks like a reddish tone. So especially that armor on the front leg of the horse that's hanging down, like there's some reds in there that really, again, kind of make it look more like fire than being a yellow armor. And again, maybe you're looking for that, but I think going with letting the yellow stand out more would be pretty good for this model. That being said, then the blue is a great complement to this. You go to light dark. There's the cloak, or the cloth that's down behind his leg. Could use some darker colors in the folds, and I think maybe that means that you could include a darker blue in your mix, so that you can get even a line shadow down into those creases between things, because it looks like that, rather than just being wavy, it looks like it's cloth folded over or laying on top of other cloth, which would have a darker shadow in the space between. Let's see if we got a couple other shots. We have one of the things I'm wondering about is the armor itself. You've got the armor is kind of a steel armor, the edging, etc. That's not yellow, and I don't.
Did we lose Eric? You guys still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Looks like we lost Eric though.
Ah, gotcha. Okay, it is just Eric. I wanted to make sure it wasn't me. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully Eric will...
difficulties, internet.
Yeah, indeed.
Bear with us.
I'll go back to sharing and we'll finish up. Actually, we'll move on. I'll leave it up and then Eric can finish if he comes back. How about that?
Okay.
All right. Fair enough. Okay. All right. So I'll keep going. So Sparker, he's back. He used to be 2D sick, and now he's doing some Conquest minis. Okay, so he said he's using some color shift paints, playing with bone mold shading. He said he's going to revisit the bases later, so sure enough, no problem. We'll ignore the bases then. Okay, so the color shift is having an interesting effect. You're using it fairly sparingly, which is, I think, the best way to use that stuff. You don't want to use it as the primary on a model. Looking through all this stuff, I like these guys. I think your bone work is actually really stupendous. I like the different colors you're working in here. It's a lot of visual interest. I don't know how smooth you're trying to be. So like when I look at these guys, like some of the areas of blending need some more, work smoothing it out. If that's what you're going for, I don't know. I think the green in these guys could use a little more. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. Could use a little more depth and variation. I think you may want to also think about some kind of pop color on here. As someone who does love very monochromatic and simple paint schemes, I respect this. But a little bit of a maybe contrasting type pop color. So much of these guys are so neutral. Something that actually has some hard color. Could be a little bit of red. Could be a little bit of blue. Hard to say. Maybe a little bit of purple. That would probably work. Blue might be a bit off. Everything's very naturalistic. So that's what I think there. This bug girl is kind of interesting. I think the color shift paints, they're hard to highlight or shade or do anything with, really. They just kind of do what they do, and hopefully that works. My biggest pushback would be on the skin. I think it looks kind of uniform. It's got all these interesting textures and muscle lines and striations and layers. I think you could work some more broad coloration into it. Like, let's just take this arm, for example. It feels like around these muscle clusters here, we'd see more reds and purples in here, around there, and like in the depth of the leg, that kind of thing. So a little more variation in the skin, I think, would really take this girl up. But I quite like it. The face is really nice. You did great work on this, like, sort of, I don't know, kabuki mask type of look or whatever. That looks really good. So yeah, overall, cool stuff. Eric, are you back?
Yeah.
No, you're fine.
That color shift thing, I had a little bit of an experiment with it, and I didn't catch it. I think that on this larger model, I can see that it reads a little bit better, but I was doing it on smaller, like regular man size 28 mils, and it just didn't have enough surface area to really read its effect. So I may be a little bit mildly more renewed by seeing how you worked it in here. But I'm still a little bit skeptical about its uses on such a small scale.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because if you do like the whole model in it, it just becomes too much, right? So it's a tricky paint to use. It's a tricky paint to use.
Now this confrontation series is fairly new. I saw them for the first time I'd seen them.
Yeah,
they're definitely a considerably bigger size model. Like that construct there is probably the size of a Larial.
Oh wow, jeez.
So
with the beetle?
Yeah,
like beetle included.
Oh, I think so.
Okay.
Oh wow.
So I mean, and even their cavalry and infantry are closer to 32-inch or 32 millimeter scale.
Yeah, so like sort of
or bigger.
Yeah, 32, 35, something like that. Gotcha.
So,
anything else you wanted to wrap up on this, dude? We left him where you were.
I mean, the other thing I was going to try and touch on was variation in the metals, and so getting some more depth. And I wasn't certain in this whether or not that had to do with the sculpts or if there was opportunities to work with, again, some darker metallics and light metallics, and to break up kind of where he's placed the metals, etc. So it could be just a wash. To kind of dull some of those down a bit, and then line highlight them back up. But I don't know that I could tell from these photos what the best approach would be.
Right on. Okay. Yeah, cool stuff. All right. Yeah. Let's finish out with some Shadespire. Would you like to start with the Reavers there, Kieran?
Yes, because you're hovering over them. That's why I've chosen my answer that way.
Easy enough.
Let's go. So I have, I've had the opportunity to paint both. Nick's showing us both his corn guys as well as his orcs, so we'll look at both. Let's get a tighter look in here at corn guys. Well, obviously the big feature that you have to be attentive to on these fellas is flesh tone. So that's probably where we're going to start talking. So being that there's lots of musculature on here and there's actually great depth, those are the things that we can work with and build upon. You've gone, like you can tell from a distance, the musculature on these things, but I actually think that you could perhaps go a little bit further, Nick. And I'm mostly talking about shadowing. So when you work in this kind of spectrum and you look at flesh tone under shadow, you can actually work in a little bit of blue and violet a little bit more. Touched on it a little bit just a couple of minutes ago when we were looking at Morathi, and she worked in a fair bit of violet in places like under the armpits, under the chin of your fellows there, and down the front of the neck would be a good place. Some of them got a fair bit of, muscle bulk on their back as well. So there's a few spaces on the backs of the models that you can work in a little bit of violet as well. And also that can be done to a good effect if you use a light washing or glazing of something violet to accentuate the scarring on these guys, which is another feature that are sculpted into these models that's worth bringing out. Let's look at Karsus, for example. He's the guy that's second from the left on your screen watching at home, and he's got a whole scarred-in corn symbol on his chest that's a raised up, as opposed to the other guy further to the left, which is carved in. And this is a spot that could be violet, and you can work a little more color in that way. So I think that's the next step to do in the flesh tone. You could put it in like that. There's also opportunities if you want to go even further with it. But this you have to do a little bit more controlled, as you can even go into a little bit of blue and really, really work some shadows. But that has to be in concert with you really working shadows and force lighting in the rest of the model. So let's stay away from that for now. Just think about violet to cast more shadow and accentuate those scarring bits. Let's look at a couple other things too. He's got just 2 shots of each, right? So he's got a front and a back side.
Yep.
I think with the dark pants, it reads to me as a little bit of a bluish gray. I think if you wanted to do this to read black, I think you just actually go another pass of whatever dark wash you have to dull it out a little bit. And then you can just do one more level of tiny highlight on there in a controlled way, and that'll get that caught. The other thing I guess we can touch on too is you're working with the metallics here. So looking at Karsus axe is the one that we can see flat facing us right in the center. And he's got a bracer on his reaching hand as well. And that reads pretty well. I think the where you're capturing the light and accenting it works out really good. The only downside, the thing that lets you down on the axe face, is that black wash that you use to do the dark side of it. I think that came across a little bit heavy, and you'll have to just work on a little bit more smoothing and transitioning of going black to white as you traverse along there, because that one came in a bit heavy. So that may require you to do just a little bit more glazing of your mid-tone to get it through there. I don't know, Nick, if you work with a wet palette, but if you just do a grayscale on your wet palette from black to white, you can pick out from there. That's one technique that I've used on doing this metallic stuff that can read really well. So that's my recommendation on that. And what else would I like to say? Let's flip back to the front and see if something else catches me. Yeah, a little bit more definition maybe. I see you've pulled out some brass metallic here in a couple spaces as well. And that one actually does appear a little bit flat. So to build on that, I think, again, you can just work some more shadow into that and then just choose your places judiciously for light catches. And even on brass, you can mix yourself up a pretty bright gold to catch the light catches. And that might require you mixing in a little bit of silver with it to do so. But a couple of light catches on there with color shift in there to match up what you're trying to do with the axe faces and the silver parts. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Ork time.
And then yeah, let's go to orcs. Let's talk about orcs.
Orcs.
So in this one, people will notice right away that these orcs are pale-skinned orcs. These are not green orcs. And it's fine. Like I think that this works really well. If anybody remembers Azog from the Hobbit films, that's this color of skin. So it's happened before. Don't fight it. Orcs can have pale skin. Oddly enough, though, I think I'm almost going to have the same critique on the orc skin, and that is that I think to sort of give us the illusion of depth and life behind that, a little bit of extra violet in that skin tone will really work. The kind of places that this would show up the best is on like the lower half of the mouth, you know, sort of on the bottom lip, if that was had a little bit of violet glazing in it, and then around the nose and the eyes, that sort of space. See, even Gerzag, who has a scar across that one eye, has a little bit of a reddish and a violet going on in there, and that sort of sells the idea of a little bit more life going on in the model. I suppose you could even add it around the ears too, on the inside of the ear. That would be a good spot. So think about that. I think that'll add a little bit of extra life and depth to the flesh tone on these guys too. Moving on though, the next thing I want to talk about is rusting on your metal. So on these guys, you got full on metallic, and then you just done the rusting with washes. So it appears. So you use some sort of chestnut ink or whatever sepia color you've gotten on there. I think again, this needs to be a little more deliberate. A couple things that I could recommend, and it's a little bit more bold to do so, is take a crappy brush that's sort of fraying out already and it's stiff and its bristles are going in several directions, and get yourself some orange paint and dry your brush out almost entirely and stab at this model on the faces where you want rust to appear. Okay, do that first. Only a little paint will appear every time. You obviously don't want to overload it and turn it entirely orange, but when you're doing little touches with very dry paint, you can get some rusting going on in there, and you can be a little bit more controlled about where it goes to a degree. And then after that, you come at it with a general wash of this sepia, and it will accentuate that a little bit better. So that's my recommendation of doing some simple rusting on this kind of thing. And then you just simply have to pick out a few spots with your brighter metallic to catch the sharp edges where they have just chopped through the skull of a human and shaved off a little bit of that rust and gotten a nice sharp edge. So last thing I want to say before we move away from this is the red patching on the armor reads really well because you're moving through a very deep red into a brighter one. I think you could do a sharp edge highlighting on the top edge of some of those plates though, as one little extra thing. So that might be moving into just a little bit of orange to do so. And then my final compliment for you, which I think is always a challenge to get right, is do all this checkerboard action that you've done on here and keep the sizing of them consistent. So when I look across the chest plates, shoulder pads, etc., you've managed to keep the sizing of those things consistent, which I appreciate as a skill, and that reads pretty well. And it certainly is very orky, so we always like that. Good. So there you go. A couple of great Shadespire crews that are ready to hit the field.
Very nice. All right. Well, with that, gentlemen,
take an intermission.
Yeah, I think it's time for an intermission. Exactly. I think we go. Let's freshen up our coffee, shower, randomly change clothes for no apparent reason, and
concessions.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up. So for all of you, it'll be a second. For us, it'll be maybe sometime longer. See you in just a minute.
Okay.
All right, we're back. Coffee refreshed, showers taken, clothes changed, maybe, maybe not. I think Eric is, in fact, wearing his painting sweatshirt again. He's got his painting hoodie on.
Guys, it's been 5 minutes.
Oh, that's right. Sure. Yeah, you just decided not to change. Good call. So we're going to get right back into this. All right. So we pick up here. Share this out. There we go. Is that coming through all right? Everybody see it okay?
It is visible.
Wonderful. So we're going to start out with Matthew Hipsher, who says lots of firsts for this model. First Primaris, first NMM that he thinks doesn't look terrible. Power Sword, and first he's going to try to base. So he says he'll try to base it later. All right, I'll give you a pass. Okay, so I want to focus in here on two things, the Power Sword and the non-metallic metal, because those seem to be the areas of chief concern. So, when we look at this guy, the first thing I will say is you are capturing a good deal of what we would want to see out of the NMM. But what we need to see is more, as is usually the case. Non-metallic metal, the name of the game is tonal variation. Take a drink. So you want to make sure that you really are pushing your dark colors into here, like dark browns, sepias, purples or blacks, into these edges, into these recesses. Like each one of these little feathers on the aegis needs to have a dark line to it. You want to generally run the edge of this down with a white line. So like each edge should have a little bit of white to it if you're trying to really capture gold. You can also capture reflections going across or something like that. They don't need to all be on the tip. They can kind of hover through the middle here, where a light line has come down and struck them and is reflecting like that. So you want to go higher with your contrast. Now your actual mid-tone color and highlights look fine. You probably want a little more yellow-white at the high end. So that is to say, let's call it your upper, like your 80% to 95% highlight needs to be a little more probably ochre white, yellow white, something like that. When it comes to the power sword, I think you have much the same story. First of all, the hilt, I would make gold in the same way as I would do with this skull here. Like, I'm not sure why we have this streak of blue coming down. I don't know if that was an accident and you painted over something or what. But you'll want to make sure that skull gets gold. I would also make this hilt gold. It looks off-balanced and unfinished when it's done in gray. I assume you're going for like a steel NMM, but it just doesn't look done. That's the challenge. So just make this the same gold and you'll be fine. Especially because he's a captain and we would expect the hilt to be gold. That's the sort of preconceived notions we'll bring to it. So don't paint against expectations. Now, when it comes to the power sword, much the same story is going to apply here. When you're doing these in the future, you want to think about running down darker. So you only go into, like, I would call it a slightly dark mid-tone blue. You don't need to go all the way to black with power swords, but you want to make sure you get darker than this. So something into a quite deep, into a deeper blue black would be appropriate in the lower part here. When you get to your white lightning lines, you want to make sure your line is sharp, thin, and crisp. So look at my video on painting sharp, thin lines and or how to paint smooth white. Your key is going to be something like a Dollar Rowney FW white ink or, some flow improver or something like that to really get a nice, and then a very sharp tip brush to really get some nice sharp lightning crackling up this blade. You've got the right idea in your patterning. So that's moving correctly. Like, it's how it's traveling across the blade, and you don't have them all splitting out. Some split out and come back together. So your patterning is correct. You didn't go over the top with it. I think that all looks really good. You just want to make sure that you don't have, like, I can see the fuzziness in here where we didn't get an even application of the paint and it kind of wavers in thickness a little bit. So those would be my two main pieces of feedback for you. That, and just make sure when you're doing a guy like this that you keep everything nice and clean. So you want to look at stuff like, I can see where the red didn't get completely covering here, and this little spot, just stuff like that. Okay. But good stuff overall, man. I like it. I think I want to paint this Primaris Captain, by the way. I just painted like my first Primaris Marine. I just did my first one too. How about that? Hey, Matthew, we there. How about that? And I really loved it. It's a freaking, they're great sculpts to paint. So I get it. All right. Next up, Nick Troiano.
Yes.
Our Alaskan bound, or our Alaskan brother.
Right. So he's done this gun hauler in the same style as his bigger ironclad, which we'll see in a couple of frames. But what Nick wanted to ask about this is he was doing a little bit of comparison of what happened with his shininess of metallics from the previous model to this one. So let's try to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to have to make a couple of suppositions here. And the photography of shadow and stark highlight might fool me a little bit, but I'll give it a try anyway, Nick. What you mentioned in your description is that you were using Nuln Oil to sort of bring this sort of deep blue part of it and to work over your metallics, the glossy version that is. I don't know that that's by itself, the way that I understand that works. I don't think that would knock too much out here. What I wonder is the strength of the undercoat is strong enough. So here's my guess. My guess is that to reinforce the color that's underneath that you're laying this oil on top of, probably needs a strengthening of two or even three coats to make it very solid. And that will give it, by virtue of the way metallics work, it'll give it some little bit of depth into it already. And it'll have more opportunity for light reflection if it's a metallic paint, just by virtue of doing those extra layers. Because as you can imagine, metallic paint being what we know that it's made up with a whole lot of little tiny fragments of metallic, or at least for mica, the way that they make it. So it has reflections in different directions depending upon how it lies and when the paint dries. So if you have those extra layers, then you're covering more angles to catch light, and therefore it will real or falsely appear to have more reflection by virtue of having extra layers to it. So that is one supposition about it. Of course, the other way that you can, what you could do as you advance in doing your metallics is you could force the highlight to be exactly where you want it to be. We've talked in other tones in the past about other ways of doing metallic, both with or without actual metal flake paints, and thinking about where the light strikes, and you would purposely put highlight colors in those spots. So when we think about that on the hull of your gun hauler here, so if we can flick back to a shot of the gun hauler by itself, maybe one with a little bit more light on it. Yeah, so you can see by virtue of where your external light is, there's a couple capture points, one on the big floaty ball, and then another point right on the front of the prow, and then a few other light catches in other places. So if you think of where that light strikes from, and maybe you do choose this direction, then you can reinforce by mixing in a little bit of silver with your base paint to get it a little bit brighter. I think Mithril Silver is the G-Dub brand, if that's the ones you're using. And then you can sort of, with some thin glaze, you can get that reinforced point. The challenge, of course, that you're going to have, Nick, when you do that sort of stuff, is that it can, if you don't do it carefully, can look like a stop-start sort of transition in the metal and look unnatural. So you have to be able to sort of feather it out or glaze it out, depending on which of those terms rings more true to you, to make that sort of light catch point, and without making it look too stark and harsh. Similarly, you can carry that on all the brass points as well. So get out your brighter color gold, or if you got a brass color that's very bright, you can pull out those and actually purposely place where those light catches are gonna strike, so that no matter which way you turn this model, you're going to have a distinctive light catch and a more convincing metallic. So yeah, I hope that helps. I know it's very general, but the way that the lighting is done in this photography, I have to guess a little bit about how you did the paint application, but I don't think it's too much to do with the Nuln Oil that you lay over top. Unless it really actually pools in some spaces, which now that I look a little closer, I think on the prow I can see some spots where it kind of has. Anyway, the other thought that I had for you, if we can switch back to the pair of them together for a sec, I wanted to make a comment about the crystal clear stem. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I hate the crystal clear stem, but I love the black painted rod that holds up your big ironclad. So do that all across the board. Everybody in the world, for your flying models, do that from forever onwards. It even looks fine against your big snowy, super heavy avalanche snowfall bases. I really like it that way. And then just as a tidbit, before we go away from Nick's stuff, he has a couple of last frame shots about showing off his storage solution for these big monstrosities. So we'll share that with people. See, he cuts himself a little bit of a silhouette shape and then uses this pluck foam to make it possible to tuck him in. I use this battle foam stuff as well for several models, and I can attest to the fact that it works out pretty good as long as you don't short yourself on the depth. You need a little bit of extra depth, because the backing layer of when you stack these things can damage the models pretty easy if they rub against the layer that you're putting on top. Yeah, but there you go. He's got one more frame shot that he shows another one, but that's just
if I might make a thought, just as an alternative, because I hate plucked foam and find it to be the anathema to models. Plucked foam is just like the friction on it is so high. It's basically like, hey, do you hate the paint on your models and want it to get rubbed off? Fantastic. Use this stuff. You know, I don't generally store my models in sandpaper, and the friction on plucked foam is not that much different than a mid-grade sandpaper. So, you know, there you go. There's that. What I think is and what I know Tom obviously has a KO army as well, and how I move big models like this is you magnetize the base, and you get yourself like one of these people have started making mag trays now as well, by the by, same people. But you can also just go get a cookie sheet out of your kitchen and put it in a piece of Tupperware, and then magnetize them right to that sheet, and they don't touch anything except air. And like 4 N52 neodymium magnets will stick these things so you could turn the Tupperware upside down for the most part, and it won't move. And I've never had a model touch against another model or rub paint or anything like that. Like people often ask, you know, what do you do about varnishing your models? And my answer is I don't, because the models don't touch anything except my fingers every so often. And that's why, like, you only really need to worry about that when you do stuff like stick them in this foam where you're putting them up against sandpaper that's rubbing them all the time. So just another thought and alternative you may want to take in mind there, Nick. I've had a lot of success with very fiddly models. I have a lot of fiddly armies, and I don't ever get paint rubbed or anything like that. So just a thought. Your mileage may vary, as always. You must do what you think is right, of course. All right, cool.
Handy tips.
There you go. All right, Nicholas Hyatt is up next, and he brings us some pink horrors. So if we remember a couple months back, he brought us some pink horrors, and he was trying to do some teleporting bases. So now he's trying to swirl them together a little more.
Yeah, I think it's and I tried to look back, and because I don't think I was here for that comment, but I tried to look back and see what other people's comments are. It's a great time to point out again how much great feedback our community gives. You know, if your model never gets mentioned on here, it's probably gotten just the right amount of comments anyway from people in the community. So thank you, everybody. I like what you're trying to do in terms of the experiment of trying to show these guys coming out of the warp or coming out of you know, the chaos portal type of thing. And you make a good point in some of the comments that you've made in kind of your work in progress, in that how do you make it look like they're coming out of it? And so I see in some of these cases you've popped their, you know, you've cut them at the ankle or that sort of stuff, and they're coming out. So all that is really great. I mean, I think it's just a really cool feature to attempt. I think where the illusion breaks for me isn't in your swirls, because I think, I mean, and even your choice of colors I think is interesting and chaotic, and I think the models it blends with the models, and it's an interesting thing that they're coming out of, but the models still pop off of it, and it's that there's no other materials around, and that the portal goes to the edge of these artificial frames and stops. So oftentimes our basing ends at the frame, but we can easily imagine that it goes beyond that, etc. I feel like that by just having the top of this swirl and the top of the base accentuates that they're on a base. And so the thing that I would be interested in seeing would be other things swirling, or the swirls going around other things. So if they were still thinking about there being maybe rocks sticking through it and affecting it, or, you know, other limbs or other hands, like that there's more than one coming out of that same portal. maybe that the portals in some cases are at an angle, so you build it up to where, because you would ask the question of how do you make them feel again like they're coming out of it but not reducing your total height. Like Vince has some really cool if you look at his ice tutorials using cut out pieces of plastic from your what are those called, the plastic pop for like minis or
From your clamp packs.
Clamp packs, that's it. You could take that plastic, you could reinforce that, you could put that, put up a rock coming just a little bit off the base and like anchor that piece of plastic to that rock, or even have it cut through it so it's like the rocks, it's like partially around the rock, and do your swirl thing, and then have the pink core popping out of that where there's nothing on the back side of it. So I think that there's some more you could do with basing material to make that feel like it exists in an environment and it's appearing out of nowhere like magic. So first and foremost, I love the concept. I think it's fantastic, and I've seen people do it with their big centerpieces coming out of like realm gate portals or coming out of stuff like that. And or warp gates for, I just saw one, I think Darren Latham just posted something like that, a new Games Workshop terrain piece that they're working on where it's Dark Eldar or Drukhari coming out of a webway portal, and the big Tantalus is like halfway through it. So I've seen it done on that big scale, but to do it on a small scale I think is super ambitious, really cool. And I think that just with the effect of some plastic discs, and those could be all different shapes and sizes. They could be just about closing as like a toe is coming out of it. They could be just opening up with just like the head and arm coming out. So you could do a ton more transition. You could have one coming out backwards, because if you cut off the head of one popping out in a shallow way, you could have the rest of that body popped out for another one. So I guess I like these guys. I think the swirl part, you've done a lot to master that, or do more on that to make that look cool. So I guess I would say where it breaks for me is that it's all flat and it's all on this vertical space, and they're all exactly 32 millimeter circles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So fantastic concept. There's just a couple ideas to how you could vary it and get that, push that effect to its furthest level, to its most.
I want to build on what you just said for a minute, because I think you actually solved it right there. I think you're dead on, Eric. So that like ice tutorial that I had, I think, and using those clamp packs, I think is a great idea. Punch out a bunch of circular discs out of like clamp pack stuff, build normal bases, like traditional bases, and set those at tons of different angles and have the miniatures emerging from them, because the portals wouldn't all just be necessarily on the ground, right? It's chaos. These things are emerging from the warp. They're coming out everywhere. So you could have like a normal world with like some being exactly what you said, some vertical, some at a 45-degree angle, and so on. And you can just use and paint that piece to be the actual portal, but then it's still set in the real world. I think you nailed it. That's exactly right. I think that would super sell the concept. I hadn't thought of that before, and I'm sorry, Nick, but I think Eric just cracked the code right there.
That's why we have a village.
It takes a village, my friend. Good thinking, Lincoln.
It takes a village to raise a painter. Is that, or a modeler?
That's exactly what the old saying is. Yes, you nailed it. You nailed it exactly. All right. Great stuff, though, Nick.
Yep.
Okay. So let's see. Next up, we've got Derek Graham, who says it's his first post here in the 10th model he's painted. All right. Cosimo is back with a little Grandmaster of the Ravenwing, and Thibaut brings us his Night Vault starter set. So what I would like to, if it's all right with you gentlemen, I'd love to take the Night Vault starter set and comment on some of his stuff that I see there. If Kieran, you wouldn't mind handling Cosimo's Ravenwing, and Eric, if you could help out Derek with his model.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's begin with Thibaut, sorry. And the grand tradition of screwing up Tebow's name continues. This poor guy has had to put up with a lot from me. Okay. He used these as practice for loaded brush, and he was able to see the value of the technique. And he says he mentions hating the push fit models. Yep, you sure will. Okay. So let's take a look here. By the way, the answer is yes, cut the pins and just glue them normal. Okay. So we've got a lot of non-metallic work here. And, when you're doing heavy non-metallic work, boy, oh boy, is loaded brush like a lifesaver. I mean, if you look at how, somebody like Ben Comets uses it, that's frequently how he's using it in that technique. And in general, I think this is very well done and well applied. You can see the value of it when we look at the gold and the steel. I find the sword on the back evocator quite eye-catching. I think that looks really nice. I think your blues on the cape are very striking. So I want to actually go to this mini right here because I think this girl has a lot of interesting features that we can talk our way through. So I think what we do need to work up is our highlights. Your sword, you get a lot of you get up to sort of the highlight I would want to see. Some of that lower reflected light highlight could either be a little dimmed, a little thinner, or a little smoother, kind of all the above. The gold, what I would say is we don't go bright enough. Your sort of left foot down at the angle, it looks like it's getting to almost white, but like the face, which should be the focal point, isn't really the brightest point on this mini. It's the sword by far. I don't have like a white reflection point on the face or anything like that. And that's where we're missing out. When we're doing this kind of like gold, my best recommendation is loaded brush is a great place to start. It's not a great place to finish unless you're on a very small space. So what I like to do is I start with loaded brush, and then I'll go back in and often reinforce my highlight and do some glazes to kind of bring everything together, or even some tints or something. I find that will usually give you the best result. A little mix of all those techniques is usually your big winner there.
After I'm done with loaded brush, I'm tired. I'm done.
That's it. Calling it a day right there. No, I understand. That's totally fair.
Anything loaded is a big meal.
Sure, absolutely. It's like you start with your loaded baked potato, then you go to your loaded mac and cheese, and then you get your loaded brush. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, sure. But so like the edge of like the breastplate that she has, the nose, the side of the face, all of these things should be catching like some pretty pure white light points. There's a corner, like at this area, this corner here on the tip of the sword. Here, this should be like reflecting super strong, probably the edge of the fingers, edge of this thumb plate, the edge of here, like here. Like these points that I'm pointing out here should go basically to the same white or maybe even brighter than you've taken this toe right here. This is the area where you nailed it the most. Okay. Now, all that being said, these guys came out fantastically well. I think that your colors look really good. Like as far as paint application and the coloring of it, these guys are top notch. The blue goes with the magenta fantastically well. Your non-metallic steel has a nice, very slight blue hint to it, which sells its realism. The gold looks rich. You worked in a lot of darker tones. No real concerns about tonal variation here. That's for sure. And at the same time, you didn't take the cloaks as far, which is what you would expect since they're cloth and would not reflect in the same way. These are extremely eye-catching minis. I think overall you did a great job. So that's my thoughts.
This paint scheme is very appealing to me.
Absolutely, man. It really is great. I mean, these are great minis. This particular Underworld set is really nice. Very dynamic minis. All righty. So Cosimo brings us Samael.
Hey, well, this is quite an intricate model, and he's built it up with a big old base with extra activity going on it. He mentioned in his comments here that he was gearing up to do the Monte San Savino paint competition, and this was going to be his effort to bring to there, which he didn't quite get there, but hopefully we can have some discussion here and lots of feedback to get you there. So I'm going to kind of talk about this as an overall sort of a composition piece, and my general thoughts on this. So when we look at this piece as an overall from this perspective here, we see that there is quite a fair use of spectrum of colors. So we got a strong representation of blue, some green, as well as some red that you've carried on in this iron oxide on the bottom side, and very little red up top except for on his opposite shoulder pad. There's a little bit of that. So that's where I want to start. I want to talk about, the composition of this model as a whole. So the feature of it, of course, should be Samael right in the center of it as he's reading his book flying through the air. Okay, that's what we should be concerned with. However, I think that if everybody takes just a second to blink a couple times and then look at this model, I bet you're first drawn to one of three other things. And that is either the blue feathers on the prow, the iron oxide of the torn up metal, or the green space marine that's on the base. Do you guys feel any differently? Did you look at either of those things?
Nope, I agree completely.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the big composition problem, is I think that we need to find ways to bring concentration onto Samael himself. And my first thing is, despite the fact that I think you probably spent a fair bit of time and we're trying to be real creative with this Space Marine on the base, he only detracts from it, I'm afraid. I don't think that he adds to that. Beyond just the color splash down there, I think that his positioning is such that that big bright red sword is, again, a detractor. And there's something about, for me anyway, maybe not everybody feels the same way, but when models are falling off the base as far as this guy does, it feels like it's sort of out of environment overall. So I don't think that little vignette adds a whole lot to it, and in fact takes away from it. So let's go look at a couple other frames here and talk about some other aspects of it, because he's actually tried out a fair number of different skills with this. The one thing that we see here at the backside is his blue flare of engines. And he's actually done an okay job of selling the idea that there's a firing engine there, and it's got some kind of ion pulse that's blasting out light to propel him along. I think that's a spot where it needs to spill over a little bit onto the cowling. So you need to have some blue that flares out onto the cowling that captures those engine pods. And if we flip to the left side of the model, which might be the next frame or maybe the one after, he has another option of OSL where he's using some orange there in the center of the model. And then he also has a plasma coil underneath the prow at the front. So in both of those cases, you have spilled out some extra color on the space around it. And I think that's a lot more appropriate. Although the one tip that I want to give you about the plasma coil at the front is that the hoses that it's reflecting upon are a red hose, and you've got blue against it, wouldn't pick up that well if we're talking about real light interaction. And this is, color wheel spectrum theory, that one of the things that's missing from red, well, its exact opposite is green, to be truthful, but a blue is often going to be really dulled down rather than actually reflective on it. So a better choice of color for that coil, or rather the hoses that the blue coil is reflecting upon, might be a little more, if you shift towards a little bit more towards yellow or even orangey, then it'll pick up a little bit better on there. And it'll be more realistic. Other things I want to talk about while we're here, though, just to give you some compliments, is I like the richness of the sort of a tan fabric that you've used on Samael instead of doing a bright sort of tidy white of his cloaks. You've also used that on the purity seal scripture, as well as the pages of the book that's on the top of his tank. It's not a tank. I'm calling it something else, but you know what I mean.
His bike.
So that I think feels very rich, and I like the color tone of that. If we can get a shot of the cloak, though, the one thing that I think I would say, Cosimo, to take that up another level is to do a representation on there, if only for the sake of making it feel like it's a different texture. And what I mean by that is you don't want paper to seem exactly the same as this guy's robes, because then otherwise you give us the impression that he's wearing paper robes. Okay. Does he have an over-the-top shot of this guy in one of these? Yeah, so he's done some extra OSL paint, or it's not OSL rather, but some freehand painting on his robes. But what I mean by this is the robes that are trailing away, as far as the tan color and texture of them, feels the same as the pages on his book. That's the point I'm trying to bring home there. But while we're here on this frame, the other thing that we can quickly talk about is he has done some non-metallic gold, which I think reads pretty well, although I think that your deeper color can go just a little bit darker to sell that color transition and get a little bit more reflection on it. But at the same time, I noted here, and you actually said in your description, that you purposely did this sword and only this sword in real metallics instead of the other non-metallics you did on the rest of the model. And I think that's one other composition inconsistency that I think you'd think about if you're going to go to Monte San Savino, is that creates it. How do I say it? It actually dispels your non-metallic that you're doing elsewhere by doing an actual real metallic on this part of the model. It dispels all the effort that you've done on the rest of the non-metallic. So you do, I believe, when you do a model from start to finish, you have to choose one side of the fence or the other and stick to it. So if you're to work on this for next year's MSS, then I think you go congruous, all non-metallic or all metallic, and don't switch it up on the model. So I guess overall, I want to say that you've explored some good things here, and I guess I also want to add that I'm intrigued by this jade that you've done on his sort of back banner, if that's what that is. I like that idea, and I think that's worth exploring and doing some more with marbling in there. That actually might be something that instead of the green on the base or the green marine on the base, if you want to pull green down there a little bit lower, you might put a broken slab of marble. Maybe you use those Sigmarite ruin pieces that Games Workshop sells and marble that up in the same way, and I think that will give you a bit of triangulation for that. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of things going on here, and it's a complicated thing. I think you've achieved great things in a number of ways, but I think composition-wise, those thoughts that I've shared with you, I hope you can put to practice, or at least think about them and see if you want to put those into effect, adapted to you, and hopefully at the end of this, you will have a very noteworthy model that you can take with you to Monte San Savino next time around. There we go. So there's a lot of things I left you with there. So
right on.
Lots to go away with.
Indeed. It's a complicated model, that's for sure. It's so busy. It's a tough one. All right, Derek.
All right. Show me what you got. Why don't we go ahead and click through and see if we've got a number of angles. All right. So the lighting's a little low on this, so we're gonna. This model has something really good, nice going for it. It's got a lot of textures. It's got a lot of cloth, which gives you the ridges. And from the look of it, it looks like you're doing a great job of cleanly giving it the attention it needs to get brighter on those ridges and darker inside the creases. We've got, looks like bluish skin. This guy is probably a necromancer because he's over a grave, and doing necromantic things. So I think those things work. The blue skin, I don't know, probably could. I would say the one thing with blue and green that I always have trouble with is that is there the tones. When the tones are too similar, nothing stands out. And so I would, because the necromancers operate in the dark, I could see there being some muted and, not totally, you don't want maybe as bright of highlights on some things. However, going with a paler skin would be totally in line with kind of what, a necromantic or a, somebody who lives, doesn't get out in the sun much, etc., by choice or whatever affliction. And so I like the blue as a base, but I would say push that into brighter light highlights. And the thing with cool colors and necromancy in terms of and darkness is that, pale skin, moonlight, all those things kind of play in that same lexicon of imagery. So, I think and if you push that further, if you push his skin further, we're going to be able to pick out these details, even in this low light. Those things are going to pop, and that this necromancer's face, his hands, what he's about to do, with his hands, some ritual, some sacrifice, all those kinds of things become the focal point of the model. So first off, I would say let's go lighter with the skin, and alternatively, I would probably encourage you to push the darkness of the cloak a little bit more. And so that may be, another, green wash, or even, I think you could probably even go with a dark blue wash to kind of pull in the moonlight, or kind of where the green and its highest points is seen as green, but as it goes into the shadows, you can maybe make out that color a little less, and blue could pull out that nighttime effect. As far as the base, I mean, is this guy seems like he's probably like 6 feet tall and in real grass, because I feel like the basing looks very realistic. That looks like a dug up grave with some skeletons in it, and the grass is interesting and cool. I'm not, it's a pretty big size here. Can we go back to the first or second photo? I think those are good ones. He's kind of a small guy. I mean, he's an older, you probably, miniature that's been around a long time and older, and so that makes sense. I think you could probably get away with 3/4 or half the size of a base. I really like the diorama. I like the effects that you have going on. But I feel like you could probably have stopped it right after the grave where the skeleton's hands are. That front grass isn't necessarily doing anything a lot for it. And maybe even, shown more of the skeletons, kind of like an excavated front end kind of thing. But so I think the base is a little bit big, but the effects that you have, the way you're using static grass, the way it goes to yellow around where it's been dug up, all that stuff is spot on. And I'm really impressed with that. I don't necessarily think it needs a ton of other noise, though you could, do things like, dead sticks and other rocks, or, a rat scurrying in to try and get his piece of the, the goods. A couple other elements like that would bring life to this dead scene, I guess, or that contrast. So those are my thoughts.
Right on. Ambitious for his 10th miniature. That's what I like. That's we can't understate that. All right. So I thought we'd all take a look at this one together. This is our latest submission from Bleep Loop. I saw this actually today get reshared on the Warhammer page. This is his chain rasp board. Bleep again. We all love Bleep's work. So anybody who knows anything about the Night Haunt knows that you're generally going to have a huge amount of chain rasps. And of course, Bleep has taken on his usual level of quality here to horde painting, which is a momentous challenge. Yeah, I mean, given that you could have like 40 of these guys in a single unit, I'm not sure I have much in the way of feedback other than to say, as usual, I think he's really killed this. The part that I'd like to draw everybody's attention to is his choice of coloration on things like the chains and axe heads and candelabras, where he's gone with something that isn't gold but isn't steel. It just is sort of this, it has this wonderful brown tonal color to it. Whereas like the helmet or the candelabra read more as true gold. When you look at like the axe heads, he's gone to a more heavy brown nature. And so, you know, it does, there's this very minor difference in how they read and sort of the amount of yellow he's used. It's the minorest touch, but it does segment them, but still keep him basically, I'm assuming, working in the same paints for, you know, what is a lot of models, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think yellow and going with bright gold would have been a wrong choice. You know, this brassiness, and I think even, you know, it kind of has, like you said, its own yellow and green tints in it. Yeah, it definitely fits, or I don't know, like, yeah, to the left, it looks much more kind of spoiled yellow or sandy yellow. I think complements the greens and the blues really well.
Yeah, there's something subtle about it. Like when you point out the candelabra, the helmets, and there's a couple of baubles on the bottom of the chain rasps that are anchoring them, especially the ones on the right side of the frame. There's something about the way that he does it that looks like that metal is fluid rather than solid, if you know what I mean.
I do.
And it's all about light placement and how he does it. And I don't know if that's purposeful or not, but it really is an intriguing way to get it done.
Yeah, I agree. So my one piece of feedback for you, I do have one small piece of feedback for you, Bleep. Okay?
Oh, so, you're in for it now, Bleep.
So here we go. And it actually doesn't have anything to do with the models. It has to do with the bases. Now, these are small bases. These guys are on 25s. And these are actually quite small models. Like, we have to appreciate just how tiny these guys are. Like, Bleep also gives us great photography. Can we take a moment to appreciate that I could not replicate this photo? How does he get this depth of field? I need to talk to Bleep about his photography. I can't get depth of field on a single model. He's got like 20 guys in frame, and they're all sharp. So, anywho, neither here nor there. Here's my thing for you. Them tufts, they boring, yo. The problem with the tufts is they look like tufts because they're clearly just tufts stuck on gravel. Get a drop of wash or two down, like take some Agrax or something like that. Get that down on the bottom of that tuft, so that way it looks more attached to the actual ground. That will help your tufts look less like tufts and look more like there's something growing out of the ground, because you push a little down in the bottom of the tuft, you kind of hit the area right around the base of the tuft, and then suddenly there's a color connection between the earth and the tuft that will just make them look like the grass grew out of muddy, dirty ground. It's a minor touch. It's something you could do fast, even on a big horde, but it would go a long way. I didn't want your random tufts to let down this incredible unit. So there you go.
Yeah, I think
that seems fair.
I think in that too, you need. I definitely think I'm seeing some that have no tufts on it. That's good. You need one or two that have 3 tufts on it, and kind of vary. Like that dude in the middle should have like 3 tufts.
Sure, more tuft variation.
Yep. So
tuftal variation.
Yep. So that it breaks that up and it just feels like they're in different. It's not one model, one tuft. Kind of predictability.
Yep. It's good. It's good. Absolutely. Yes. Excellent call. Nature is random. Make things that represent nature similarly random, right? Yeah.
And usually I do that by saying 3 of them are going to be 1, 3 of them are going to be 3, 3 of them are going to be 0. You know what I mean? Completely random.
Yes. You plan your randomness?
Yep.
All right. Okay. So moving on. Let's see. We've got surface. Yes, absolutely. Surface tension gives us this wonderful captain for his Blood Angels army. And D. Kraus gives us this death guy. And finally, Liam gives us this wonderfully colored Primaris Marine. Boy, which I'll tell you what, this guy is awesome. I love everything about this dude. I would really love to take this Primaris guy if that's okay with you gentlemen. I'm pretty excited, but yeah, of course, as always, feel free to join in. But I am pretty darn excited about this dude. I'm not gonna lie. So why if we don't, or if we could go this direction, Kieran, would you mind taking Mr. Smash Captain? If Eric, you want to take our Ghosty Executioner, and I'll take our Easter egg Primaris here. Is that all right?
Yep.
All right. So we start out with Smash Captain.
Okay. Well, let's look at a couple things that he's done here. First off, it's very striking, and I appreciate how he's done blends across the armor and light captures. So from a distance, this guy's really rocking the contrast, which we like a lot. There's always some room to move in that and improve. So let's get a little bit of a closer look here. Now, when we talk about the armor as an overall thing, what we have is the paint application of catching horizon lines is really good when you're doing horizontal surfaces and you're trying to think about where things reflect onto. So by the angle of this, what he's done well is he's sort of picked one direction of light, and it almost feels like it's, sort of from the head on a little bit high, sort of from the 12 o'clock noon approach, and then worked from there. So if we look at the model across the board, he has a big light catch that's right above his head on that venting module or whatever the heck that is. And then right underneath his chin, that's a big light catch space. It kind of casts itself down. And then when he goes into his sort of silvery metallic on that belt buckle is the other place that it shows most prominently. So my one tiny thing that might fix up here is underneath his sort of, golden laurels and the skull that come out there. I think that band of brightness is a little bit heavy, is the only tiny thing that I would suggest on there. And that I think the banding that's in his sort of gut right above his belt would overall stay a little bit darker. So that's the quick subtlety about that I would point out. Other points of light catch that I think are really well done is sort of that thin line that's casting down the leg greaves and across the toes. I think that all works really nicely. The right arm that's holding the hammer, I feel that you've come a little bit too broad with your highlight line on that. I think I would like to see a thinner sort of horizon line coming from the elbow going to the wrist on that one, much in the same sort of discretion that you've done on the leg greaves. But these are again minor tidbits. They may seem a little bit harsh on your surface, but you've done a great job. So I'm really just kind of firing at the high level improvements of this. But let's look at a couple other frames for the folks at home, and we'll talk about a couple other bits and pieces on here. The other thing that I'm intrigued about when we look at this backside is two things. First off, that glow that he's attained in the rockets here, because is this an old school jump pack for those of you that know 40K a little bit? Is that what that is?
Let's say sure.
Okay. Anyway, the handling of the blue on that and the glow is perfectly ideal. When I was talking about the blue versus red on Cosimo's piece a little while ago, I pointed out that it wouldn't really have any glow or OSL reflection on the red. So that's good that he hasn't tried to do that around the edging of this. But I kind of feel like the brightness of it would cast down upon the cloak a little bit. So if you go back and reapproach this and you think about this from an OSL perspective, Mr. Surface Tension, I think that you can cast a little bit of that down there. And I think in its properties, it would just sort of lighten up and get a little bit of a blue tint onto the top of the fold. So of course, in the deep recesses of the folds of that cloak, it would still be dark enough that it wouldn't reflect. Other thing to talk about while we're looking at this back is we actually get a better look at his gold, and then what he's done on all these feathers and those symbolisms. And I think that he has done a real fantastic job of forcing that perspective on here. He's chosen to sort of follow the line of the whole wing, and done a sort of a uniform highlight across the wing curvature. Whereas I think that can taper a little bit. So in the same way that your light on the red armor sort of has to taper away and become darker on the underneath parts that aren't directly catching your noon right ahead light surface, I think as you trail to the bottom of it, that band of color light reflection doesn't stay uniform all the way. And you think about where the sort of there's a little bit of an overhang at each sort of level of that wing, and I think you need to leave a little bit of a darker band just underneath there to really drive it home and make perfection. The other thing that I want to talk about while I'm here is if we can swing around and look at his force hammer. And I think the cool thing that he's done here, or at least the way that it reads to me, is he's doing this as sort of a star mace is a common thing that I think of, where he's got all kinds of little speckles and almost like a pixelated look in this thing. And I think that's kind of cool. I don't know that it needs to necessarily follow the exact dimension and framing of each hammer as a block. Like I think it's cool enough that you can have it sort of pixelating out a little bit in its own sort of random patterns, where it's a little bit of a crackle, more of a crackle look, I think would be cool to do. But I'm quite intrigued by it, and it takes a bit of fine pointillism of the brush to achieve that. So I like that. That's a big plus for me on this model. And then as we come around full circle, right back to the front again, the other one thing that I think is a criticism to work on is getting some more depth of color in face and hair. Can you tighten up on this one if possible? Does his picture allow you to do that?
No, unfortunately, I can't zoom at all. I'm sorry.
Okay. So what I mean by this is that you have done an exceptional job on this armor and your metallic and those kinds of things of forcing light points, and making sure that we understand where light's coming from and how it reflects, etc., etc. The face, though, and the hair is a uniform thing. So his mustache is the same color as the top of his head, is the same color as his sideburns, is the same color as the trailing hair on the back of his head, with all uniformity throughout. Similarly, down on his chin, it's the same as underneath his eyes and that kind of thing. So I think those are opportunities when you even though the skin is a small surface of this model, it's still the focal point of this model. Despite all the great efforts that you've made on every other part, just by nature of how humans look at things, we're going to look there first. And so I think that could use some more depth. You could bring in some violets or even some blues in some shading places to reinforce and strengthen the lighting that's going on in this guy's face. But that final thought, I want to come back full circle and say that your color study of reflection on this armor and the gold is really well executed. It's a flawless application of smoothness of paint. There's not a spot on here where I could easily find flaws in paint application or thickness or etc. So you're really surging ahead in the technical aspects of your painting, Mr. Surface Tension, and I'm glad to see this come up every month from you.
Yeah, I agree. Great take on the colors too. I love it when people experiment with, sort of the colors of Space Marines and display these things in unusual ways and the sort of almost crimson tinge to this, right? I think is actually a really rich palette that he's played with there and with some really nice tones. Yeah. Those hammers are always tough because it puts a big blue spot on your miniature that it's hard to balance out, but looks great.
Yep.
All right. Now we got a ghosty boy.
All right. This is, I believe his name is Daniel. This is he's recently into miniature painting. He just started in August, I think, and picked up Tempest Soul Box.
Can we pause for just a moment and say Daniel is already light years ahead of so many people, because the first thing he did when he wanted to submit is he watched our previous videos. He heard me praise people who put together these compilation photos, and then he did that. So Daniel, you're already one of my favorites, buddy. Right now, I want you to know that. Okay, please continue.
And he's saying he's struggling with the white, which everybody does, so don't feel bad about that. And this is and he made the base himself. That coffin is something that he constructed. And this is the capstone of doing the Tempest box. So he is he kind of saved this as his last miniature for that, and that's always a great idea. So he's gotten some praise in the space below on the comments about this base, and I know Vince is excited about this base. I'm excited about this base and stuff.
It's fantastic.
The skull with a little bit like the skull with those 3 roses, like you chose those things. That's you making an impact on this miniature and the tone and the mood, and that's some of our favorite parts of this hobby, is when you can make that your own. And so fantastic job. The base adds so much mood and character, and it weights it too in a way that I think the model by itself certainly is meant to feel like it's got this weight up on top, but it's light as air. But I think the wood up above and the wood down in the coffin are a great frame for this miniature. So I think you've added to the quality of the composition as well. If you can zoom in on this, and if you can zoom in on the cloak on his face, you're going to see a velvety smoothness, and that could be some blurriness in the picture, that sort of stuff. But if you look at this picture on the PmP2, you'll see that there's just such a subtlety between the dark green and the light green, but it works so well. I think that even though it's so subtle, and especially because that green, that emerald green, which is a great choice for this, we're seeing a lot of the blue and usually black in the cloak. So going with an emerald green on the cloth and making it this kind of velvet look, I instantly went to it, and I saw that detail, and I think that was really well executed. When it comes to whites, whites I think are about subtle layers and patience and building up to either. In this case, I would probably say it's easiest to start with the white like you have, and then with any washes that you want to use or anything like that, is that you thin them out so that when you lay them down, that they do rest in the recesses, but they don't change the tone a lot. And then you let that dry, and then you put on another tone, and maybe you start placing that in the places that you feel more comfortable placing it. I would say the place to go, I'm sure Vince, you have videos on this, but mangleminiatures.com. Tyler Mengel is a night haunt freak, and his capabilities with the white and the ghostly parts are high, very superior. And so if you go MENGEL miniatures.com, he probably has some fantastic tutorials and stuff. I know he has some tutorials on kind of working with whites and the washes and the those different things to get these smooth spectral tones. So I'll just put that as a plug.
Yeah, indeed. He does have some. He's been doing a whole very light colored, ghosty boy army, and he has a lot of good tips on doing those very subtle colors. So no, I agree completely. And Tyler's also just a really great dude.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool. And yes, I said it already. I'll say it again. That base is super fantastic, and I love everything about it. He has packed in a whole story into a 32 mil base without making it feeling like it overwhelms the miniature in any way. It's glorious. All right.
Yeah, instincts are good in that one.
Absolutely.
See more.
Yep. Okay. So, oh boy, I am excited about this. I am super excited about this guy. Liam Howell brings us this this completely off the wall Primaris Marine Space Marine color scheme. Says he had a few goals. Develop his own harmonious color scheme. Cool. He wanted some decent freehand work that wasn't black. All right. And improving the way he paints metallics. So it's going to be those kind of things, the freehand and the metallics, as well as composition. We're going to give him some feedback on here. All right. So first, let's talk about composition. I would say, yes, it works. We need the green is a slightly off balance. I'm not sure where you'd stick the other green.
D-pad.
Yeah, but the problem is he's using it to represent powered things, right? Like the spear, the eyes, the gem. So I get it. He's trying to communicate something about the thing. He could knee pad it, but he's already used the knee pad trick once. It's tough without something in his other hand. Honestly, you could just put some green glow in his hand. Who knows what it is. He's holding a green thing or something like that, but it's not bad. It's just, this is really bright. And like this Escorpina yellow green that he's using is a fantastic color compositionally, like as far as balance on the color wheel with what you have going on. It's just, there's so much of it over here. It needs something down here. I'll tell you what I would do. Here's the answer. I take it back. I have the answer. Here's the answer. There needs to be some crystals over here that are this color on this base. That's what should be here. The marble's not strong enough. You need like some standing up crystals that are this color. That would bring this whole thing into focus and create a vertical line that would actually finish your triangle, by the way, because you have a big line going like whoop, and then it just stops. If you ran it down to something on the base that was pointed up in this direction, you would finish your triangle and actually then bounce their eye back up. So, okay, there we go.
Yeah, because I bet you that's only noticeable if you look at this guy from straight over top.
Yep. Exactly. I agree. So, okay, that's numero uno. But color composition wise, for going completely out of the box on the colors, yeah, you nailed it. Green wouldn't actually probably reflect that strongly on that magenta just based on the nature of what it reflects and like how the colors work, but I don't care. I think it looks sweet as all get out, and you nailed the glowing eye effect. So, sucks to realistic reflections. I think it looks cool. So you did the right thing there. Now, the edge highlighting all looks very clean and sharp. I dig that. Your subtle colors and the shadows on the Primaris armor all look really nice. Some of your edges could be a teeny tiny bit thinner, like this stuff on the elbow greave pad here on the thumb. You may want to sharpen those up a little. But at any rate, let's focus on the stuff you asked about, which is better metals and freehand. So right away, the metals on the shoulder pad ridges, twite like a tiger right here. These are great. You've placed the lights really nicely. You have really nice shadows running out here. I dig it. The gold on the aegis in the center or whatever this thing is. I don't know if that's really what it is. This little eagle feathers with a skull. I think the aegis has the two heads. I don't know. Either way, it needs the same treatment.
The two heads, right?
What's that? Oh, you're right. The Aquila is the two heads. There you go. Yes, thank you.
Aegis is a spear, I believe.
That's probably also true.
Hey,
look,
words don't matter. People know.
There's also a Rock of Ages.
That is also true. Starring either like Chris Hardwick if you're on stage, or Tom Cruise if you're talking about the movie. Yes. Yeah, also probably true. So I need the same treatment of like, see this depth of your shadow here? I need that here and here and here and on this side of the skull, and here, right? Like I need that to pop with that same resonance, because this is like the dead center of the miniature, and this gold feels kind of flat, which is a shame, because this gold up here looks wonderful. Okay, so, and now let's talk about Zay Freehand. Boom, 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 boom. All right. So, I know he's got a shot here, the freehand. There we go. Better.
It's even better. I think there's another top down on one of those. Or
okay. Yes, right. You are. Thank you, sir. Yep. Okay. So the freehand. Yeah, good. You're going to want to thin some of this up a little bit as you go on. Like your symbol that you're going for here feels, I mean, the Marine feels kind of cartoony, so maybe that's appropriate, because he does kind of feel like, and I mean this with all due respect, he does kind of feel like, you know, Princess Rainbow, Friendship is Magic Marine. And so maybe you did want to go cartoony with the wings on the side of the hourglass. Cool. If that was your intention, then that's fine. In general, when you're doing this kind of thing, you do want the lines to be sharp and avoid like the round edges on stuff like this. Like what I mean is your fingerling potatoes here that you've got as the wings. If those were like razor sharp, they would feel probably a little better. Just we generally like straight lines and stuff like that when it comes to those kind of angles. Now, that being said, there's nothing wrong with this innately. Your light placement on this, since it's obviously painted on, but you still kind of simulated this sort of metal effect, I think actually works really well. I think that's super strong, as a matter of fact. You need to work on balancing your image a little. This goes up. It needs to come like, it should be about right here. Like this part should be also freehand, because it kind of goes whoop at a little bit of an angle. But beyond that, and like make sure you match. Doing this kind of stuff is always really hard. As somebody who's done a lot of these like double-sided eagle things, I know how hard it is to get this like exactly matching. So I get it. But like this one's fatter than this one and shorter and stuff like that. So sketching with a pencil first can generally help you kind of balance it out before you then go and lay down your paint. But overall, your variation in it looks solid and really makes the freehand pop out. Your black lines are nice and subtle and thin. I think you've edged like the freehand well. I have no issues with that whatsoever and think that looks good. Looking over here at the other side, the same thing here. There's a little bit of places where we kind of lost control, like here and here, but for the most part, you're fine. Again, when you're doing a complicated image like this, what you want to do is plan with a pencil more, because like you have a very off kilter thing. Like this one is sort of at, I don't know, what time do you think that is? Probably 10 o'clock. And this one's at like 1 o'clock, right? When ideally you would want this at 1:30 and 10:30, right? And so on and so forth. Like you'd want some balance here. If you're being intentionally asymmetrical, that's fine, I guess. But you know, it doesn't feel like you're intentionally asymmetrical here. It feels like we just kind of aren't balanced. Now the image itself is good. Circles are challenging. Again, like start with a very thin circle and then work it into a thicker circle. Like start with a thin line and then build it up and keep flattening out little edges. Cause like here, this gets too thin. Like we don't have an exact proper circle, and your eye is really good at seeing things like that as being off. The human eye can detect like things when things aren't solid on a pattern. Finally, with your text, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the Brian Regan bit about drawing letters, like starting with a big giant B and then going on when you write happy birthday. But like it feels like we didn't quite balance this text out. So here's my best advice when it comes to doing freehand text like this. Figure out your space, put a tiny little ruler up to it that has like tenths of a centimeter measured out, and then take a little dot and go one, like figure out what your even number is, and then go how many letters, divide by the number of letters you have or characters you have, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dots and put them over a particular line. Like just paint little dots, little tiny black dots, and then make those little tiny black dots the center of your letter. And if you don't end up painting over the dot, you can always come back and just put a little touch of gray over it and it'll go away. But it makes your letters be on a level, right, where they're all evenly spaced. Now, as to the text, it's really nice and sharp, and it has this. I like the sort of fancy lettering you've chosen. So I think all that works. We just need to space it appropriately. Yeah.
Another tip on text is start with the center letter.
Yeah. If you've got, I like picking words that have an odd number of letters, i.e. 3, 5, 7. That way you can literally draw the center letter, right? And then go out 1 and out 1, out 2 and out 2, out 3 and out 3, or whatever. And you can balance it so much easier when it's odd.
My only other comment on the freehand is I definitely understand not wanting to go like just flat black, etc. I would suggest maybe going darker than the purple on the armor so that you have more contrast. Because I think the blue is definitely a lighter contrast, but I would say so that it stands out next amidst the armor that's surrounding it too. And then maybe instead of the highlights being kind of non-metallic metal techniques within the individual freehand, to try and match the highlight to the pauldron. So like on, that the lightest part of that freehand is at the top of the egg, and then gets darker down to the bottom. I mean, the decals you see on these tend to be flat or one color decals, and that tends to work better at a distance of being able to read what it is. But if that contrast or that shading matches the contour of the egg, it will definitely feel like it's more a part of the mini than just a decal or a white decal or a black decal would. So that would be just an alternate suggestion if you were to attempt that on another, the next one you do or whatever. I'd love to see that. But
yep. But overall, this guy's great. Do a whole army of them. All right. Okay, so next up, Scott Palmer brings us another bust. And then Steve Wallace has some pictures of his ogre standard bearer. And then we have a nice, gross Nurgle machine here. So
that's yours.
That's a hard pass from me on that one. Hard pass. You want to fall on that sword?
I want to talk about Steve's happy ogre here.
Okay, sounds good. So what we'll do is, Eric, if you don't mind the Nurgle thing, if you don't mind falling on that sword, I'll take the bust, and Kieran can take our big giant ogre standard bearer.
Yep.
All right. So Scott brings us his third bust. And I want to go back out here and read his comments a little more detailed. He tried to push himself to use more color variation, particularly on the skin tones. Blue mixed into the highlights, reds and purples around the eyes, greens near the armor. He's not sure he hasn't been too subtle. So here's my spoiler alert for you. Yes, you have. You have been too subtle. So let's talk about this thing. This is a great bust. I've seen lots of different takes on this thing, and I like them all. I think this is a super cool bust. And I think you did a good job here with several elements. It's a little small. I wish I had some slightly bigger pictures, but let's talk about where I think we've got some opportunities. So I'll start with the composition of the body here itself. It's very dark. The whole thing is very, 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 very dark. And the problem is we have this black sort of ghillie suit and then this dark camo pattern armor. Now, I'd like to... I understand that's what you were going for, but let me take you into an alternative world. Let's imagine an alternative world where we use the same camo pattern, but we replace the brown with a light gray and this light green with a white, almost like that sort of, I don't know, I've seen that sort of camo pattern, the white, gray, black camo pattern before. I don't know on what, in a movie or something. Looks kind of cool, though. Just that alone would add so much more brightness to this miniature. And I think it would pop off a lot more. At the same time, the ghillie suit is so flat and matte and black. I would love to see something else going on there. Now, I understand you're trying to make her like a realistic mercenary is what I read this as. So she doesn't have a bunch of nonsense or bright colors, which is fair, but I still need something here. to kind of create some visual interest on this. Could be texture in the suit, could be very, you could fake a satin sheen down the line. So we sort of stipple, you could like do lots of little dots, like teeny, teeny, tiny baby dots all the way down the arm and here and out here, where like light is reflecting off the satin of like this ghillie suit or something, just very subtly, and come up from like the sort of black gray you have here to a near white gray and transitioning through. Now on the face, I love the base colors you've used. I think it actually looks really nice. You have a wonderful skin tone. But we need to pop it out more. It's too flat at your highlights. Like you don't get bold enough. If she's going to be so dark, then I need something to really latch onto. The edge of the nose and the chin, you get about bright enough. Could maybe even go a little more. But like the tops of her cheeks and this area of her brow should all match. Right? These should come to basically the same highlights as here. If we upped the contrast at the high end on the face, maybe worked a little more subtle pinks into the cheeks, not like blush, like she's wearing makeup. She's a very, she's a serious killer. She's not wearing makeup or whatever. That's fine. But, cheeks are naturally rosy. Blood tends to flow quite close to the surface in there. And so that would, again, by popping out that highlight, having some of those more smooth pinks in there, I think that would help. The final thing I'll say on her is on the hair. It's the part that I think I feel let down by. This figure has really beautiful hair, and, blonde hair is wonderfully varied in the colors it displays. Whereas like basically her hair is exactly the same all throughout. So it's the same blonde here as it is here, as it is here, as it is here for the most part. Right. So what I need to see are the light lines. And again, like I tell people all the time, just go look at a hair dye bottle. Like go search up the image online for some, I don't know who makes hair dye. Like I don't have hair, so I don't ever need to look. I haven't ever had an occasion to look, but like Vidal Sassoon or somebody, do they make hair dye? I don't know. Whatever. Sure. Probably. Look at like their picture of blonde hair. Like go look at a selection of their blonde hair dyes, and until you find the tonal range that you're going for. Because I mean, they have dozens of these, right? Of like strawberry blonde and platinum blonde and pure blonde and whatever, it's just every color under the sun. And they use computers to like really ultra force to like hyper realistic the highlights and the color depth and all that stuff for the box art or box picture, whatever you want to call it. And so it does a great job of sketching out exactly how we need to take our highlights, since we're painting in a smaller scale, and we have to basically over highlight. Because I think what I'd love to see is more tones throughout here in this area where we have the lower level of hair, capturing more subtle sepias and browns and reds. I'd love to see more white around the crown and where it flares here and here as like these extra follicles that are coming up, like light should cascade across them and fall down. That kind of stuff, just to really create that wonderful variation in the hair. So more ochres, ivories, probably like deep reds, whole reds in the shadows, all that kind of stuff. You can work in here, and it will still look blonde. It will still look just flat blonde. Like we're not trying to actually, even a flat normal blonde will have these other tones playing around in them because hair is such a complicated thing. But yeah, overall, I do like this. I like the hyper realistic take of making her this sort of tough mercenary. You did a lot of cool things. I like the symbol on her arm. I think your medals look good. I think the camo pattern that you did, like, as I said, I think a brighter color would have done well, but you executed the camo pattern really nicely. Even heating like the shadows on it, like it does heed the shadow work, like it looks darker here than it does here, which is often a thing lost with camo patterns. So I think you actually did a really good job executing on that. I think that's a real standout here. So there you go. That's my thoughts.
I'm wondering, I'm on the verge, or I'm I don't know, close to someday doing a bust.
I want to see that happen, man.
But I mean, it seems to me in all these things, in the choices that are made here, and I'm not going to tell you that these choices are incorrect, but in telling a story, you also have to balance out the purpose of a bust is often to show off color and balance and design and composition, all those kinds of things. You're trying to show off your understanding of those things. And so finding a reason to bring color into it, is almost feels like a necessity to showing these things off. So one of the problems with camo is it's hard to see. So it's not necessarily practical if you're painting something for a competition or for people to see it, right? And so, you think about being able to say, well, this is very high tech. So that means maybe she's not in the field yet, and she has a, highly mechanical or more futuristic color scheme because it can change itself, right? And so you give it an opportunity to paint some way to show that transition from, city to forest or something like that.
Sure.
And that gives you a reason to put in a orangish color or something to balance with the greens that you want to have. And maybe there's a light up on her headpiece, that then casts light down on her hair on the back. So now you've got that kind of hot element next to maybe a cool element on the front where she's going into shadow or something like that. So there's nothing in this model or in the sculpt to give you that story. So it seems like for competition, you need to find a story that lets you put the model in a composition that lets you use different colors and different palettes. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a dead-on explanation. Yes, I agree.
All right. I'll get
Cool.
there someday.
No, there's so many good busts out on the market right now. It's an embarrassment of riches, honestly, what we have right now. All right, Steve Wallace.
Yeah, this one's going to be a good bit of fun. So his Grubs Guzzlers want you to come and get it. So what I appreciate about this is Steve has been creative in a whole lot of ways. So he did this overbearingly huge custom banner for this guy by extending the pole and getting some tie wire to attach it to there. He's probably used toothpicks, etc., or whatever else to get the cross pieces. So the construction of this is where it starts. The composition of it is nicely balanced off by his little buddy on top, his little grot, who's giving directions to the guy down below because of his vantage point. But as we spin through some backside of the pictures, the other fun things that I want to show you is he's named his little guy up top. He's named him Yum Yum. It seems it's written on his back panel. And then the other thing, if you cast your eyes down below, you'll see a wonderful effort of doing some tartan pants on this guy, which is not the thing that I noticed right away, but it's just the thing that I spent the most time looking at here, because I think it's really fantastically done. Like, to get that as well synchronized as he has, with the same sort of distance of plaid and the squares that go on there, is really actually pretty wonderful. And the sharpness of the yellow that turns up in there, when the red and the green cross over, he's paid attention to put a little bit of purple in those crossover points. So this is, quite frankly, some of the best tartan that I've seen on a model. Sometimes it's tough to do on the slender 28 mil scale stuff, but certainly on an ogre's big broad butt, it's a real good place for it to show up. So
it's a good size
kudos
palette.
to you, Steve. The big broad butt of the ogre is well placed. Here's a couple other things I want to talk about. Right in the wheelhouse of Vince, I think the base looks pretty realistic, and the couple extra textures that you've added onto there is a nice touch. But let's obviously the big feature of this is the banner. So let's talk about this for a second. So one of the compliments is that you have actually done a pretty sharp job of framing your font on this, because you've actually done a little bit of black lining around it to make sure that it reads properly, because otherwise that yellow versus the green would probably fuzz out and not appear as sharp. So good job on doing that. However, as a consequence, what we can see if we get closer and tighter on this is that to make that yellow show up, it's gotten a bit chunky, right? So the actual weight of the paint of the yellow trying to get opaque, for you trying to make that opaque on here, has sort of messed up a little bit. I suspect that that's probably in part due to the paper that you're putting this onto, and maybe it's soaking in a little bit and making it a little bit wet and distending the paper. But if that's the case, I'm going to make a guess here, Steve, that you maybe didn't put a primer on that paper or a base coat beforehand, and maybe that's why that happened. The reason that I believe that is because the rest of the green surface as well, you know, there's a few number of spots where you can sort of see that it hasn't gone on evenly. So I guess that's my encouragement. If you're to do something like this again in the future, I think this still needs a little primer coat, just like the rest of your models do. And the model will take, or the paint will take a little bit easier on it. And if you're doing a bright yellow like this, you probably have to lay down as your first color a little bit of an intermediate color, like a mid-level brown, and then you can go with green over top of it and still keep your paint thin, but you can achieve it without it getting chunky. The other thing that I thought I'd suggest here is I really do appreciate how you've tattered up the trailing pieces of the banner and brought in a little bit of sort of brown grubbiness in there. But I think I'd like more of that, in truth. I think that you could reach up a little bit higher on the banner. You got a little bit of a burn hole up on the top inside, and a couple of more sort of rough, raggedy bits around both edges, and not just the bottom. I think would really sell this. Another technique that I had just thought of as I was talking here that I've seen a lot of people do with these banners is they have chopped up an aluminum can from their Dr. Pepper and use that, and then it allows them to position it with some waviness in it as well after you've done your paint job on it. It's thin enough that you can do that, and unless you're doing a sort of a straight up fold over, it's not going to crack the paint as long as you're sort of subtle with your movements, and it'll add a little bit more sort of depth and realism to the banner that otherwise would appear just plain old flat like this one. So there's a couple thoughts to improve upon this if you're ever going to do another one. But let's take nothing away from the character and the effort you put into this. I think it's really tremendous. But before we leave this one behind, I think that there's just a quick little talk about the application of paint and maybe a couple pointers for the ogre itself. The one thing about this that I think is worth working on is that gut plate. Because the gut plate just appears to be a really bold sort of flat red. I can see that you used a couple color tones in there, but it's coming in pretty hot. It's coming in pretty strong, and your white is just absolute white. To get the realistic feel of an ogre, and because you've done such a tremendous job of rusting up weapons and getting wood look weathered, etc., I think that's because of it's so very bold and bright red and stark white that it feels a little out of place for all the efforts of great realism that you've put into the rest of the model. So maybe start a little bit darker on that if you're doing more of these gut plates, and I think that'll fit in a little bit better and more realistically with the model. So in closing, I want to say, Steve, super entertaining, this guy. Nutbar's job on the tartan, I think that's great, and you've put a lot of character into this little fella.
Super great shout on the aluminum. I've not heard of that.
Very nice.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. Say that again, Eric. You were pretty faint on that.
Sorry, I said good shout on the aluminum. I had not heard that before.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Next up, we have Minis to Art, his first post. All right, and he brings us some more Nurgle people. Oh boy! Now we're glad to have you along, buddy.
Definitely. All right, let's see. Painting skin is one of the things he's having a problem with. And trying to make that, I think, one of the great things with Nurgle, compared to a lot of different things, much to Vince's chagrin, is that ability to have a lot of different textures. And especially that, that mixture, that emphasizing that join between metal and flesh. And I think it's a great opportunity to try and work with different kinds of flesh tones. And the kind of the signature of that is that you're showing some sort of pain. And Nurgle is about that pain in life, the mutation. And so it's often about emphasizing the points at which those two things meet. And so whereas you've got, I've saw in a couple, let's go back one picture. Yeah, you can see there, there's a lot of spots where the skin meets the flesh or meets the metal, and in those places you're using a purple to highlight those, and kind of be that space. And I think from a color choice, I think that works really well. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But I think one of the things I'd say is that, and I actually think that going from that purple to the light skin, I think you've got really good transitions there. I think it's going to a really good bright spot. I'd say purple tends to be bruising and kind of doesn't tend to feel as painful as reds and pinks. And so in this case, I think that one of my favorites for getting into, starting to get from purples into reds is Tuskor fur, or if it's something that's not, doesn't need to be a bright pink. But with working with the purple, a bright pink wouldn't be a bad thing either. But I would say just make sure that there's a very noticeable reddish pinkish tone along with that purple. So maybe the purple is that deepest one, because those things, what I like about that is those things have been there for a while and they're bruised and they're sore. But transition from purple to more of a pink or more of a red, and before going to that white. And I think you'd be able to, it would just look more painful, as opposed to with this, it could seem like that purple is just kind of like the inky connector, or it's stained from the oils that are in the machine, and so it's kind of deadish flesh. When you want that pink, purple's kind of dead, pink is more alive, reddish is more alive. So bring those into it. I think with that then as well, those pustules also will look more, I guess, living if you get a little orange in them. So if you use Cassandora yellow on those, and they'll hit in the recesses and get into that. And so I think that would be the other thing to do. And then maybe so down below you've got the kind of tendrils that are going down on the ground that aren't those, since there's such little skin and it's all connected to metal, making that more pink and more reddish would also, kind of show that in different places of the skin, it's more painful than others. So, if up at the top of this model, so way I would do it in this picture is up at the top near where that cylinder is kind of going through at the top mark, I'd make that the most pink. You use some pink around, where we get the flab going on in the lower section, and then again, as you're getting closer to those tendrils, you get more pink again, and those tendrils are, that pinkish red more throughout them. And then you've got a transition not only micro between where the skin is pressed and where it's flabby, but then also from top to bottom, you've got some more of that transition or balance, etc. I think that, trying to think, and I mean, the green is a really nice balance for all those colors, getting into those things. So I think that you're good there. And pink would help you stay closer to, in the range of purple would be nice. So I think those are my thoughts. on skin.
Right
Also,
on.
Vince,
Yes.
it always helps whenever, we're driving down the road and you see something unpleasant off to the side.
Yeah.
It's always nice to displace that idea with something nice. So
Uh-huh.
we could start talking about these instead of Nurgle, that these are bunny miniatures, right? And instead of pus, that there's just some pollen, sitting
Well, I'm
around.
allergic to that too.
Okay, then
Oh,
maybe
there
we
we
go
go.
somewhere else. Yeah, so I think we could do some word displacement to help you with your, with your issues.
I appreciate that. All right, so we got 2 items left. I thought we'd just tackle them together. So first off is Thomas Berg, and then next up, Thibaut brings us another submission, which I think we're all keen to talk about because this is a fantastic, glorious bust, and he did some interesting work with it. All right, so who would like to start out with the Guild Ball minis here?
Well, what I think, I'll start that out. What I think is key for folks to understand here is Thomas shared that he experimented with the limited palette idea of doing these things. So he used just 5 pots of paint on these models, red, blue, yellow, the primaries, and then some black and white. So this is a great experiment, and it really showcases what you can do artistically just with primary colors. And you can see that he's done blonde hair. He's done several different types of leathers. He's been able to do his metallics, teeth, eyes, skin. And that's a revelation I want to share with people because it's something that I only actually just learned about a month and a half ago, is that just by blending primaries, you can actually come up with a skin tone. And you can see here in this group shot that he's actually come out with 5 different skin tones just out of those colors, right? And what I mean by that is also including the muzzle around the dog's face as part of that. The way that all blends together, and you can come out with some browns as well. It treats it as a very rich kind of colored tone. Sometimes when you add too much blue, you get it flattening down, and that's how you dull down the colors, and you get it more towards dark and black. But yeah, pretty new to me to be able to do that. So that's why I'm pretty intrigued by this, and I think it's a really great experiment that Thomas has been able to execute here. What I kind of wish that he would have included here at the end of all this was a shot of his wet palette as he was doing all this, and what
Absolutely
at the end of it all, because that is a masterpiece in itself that you could probably sell at some abstract art gallery after you do this kind of exercise. So that in itself would be wonderful. So I think achievement unlocked, Thomas. You've done a real fantastic job of working the entire spectrum, starting at limited resources. So I'd recommend that anybody that feels limited by their sort of paint collection, recognize that you can still do a lot with it. But the tools are that you got to have a wet palette to be able to do this, because you have to come back and mix and blend and do subtle shifts. So you can't have it drying out on you. You can't paint it straight out of the pot. I guess you got to work depending on what values of paints you have and the nature of your wet palette. Sometimes you got to work a little bit quicker. But yeah, certainly worthwhile. I'd recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, I completely agree. The artist palette, right, is quite fun to work with, and I want to compliment him for something you mentioned, but it is a challenge when you're dealing with the artist palette to get a lot of different rich browns, because they rely on pretty accurate complementary color mixing. And I think he did a great job here. He has such a wonderful variance of them, right, between like red browns, yellow browns, and very dark and light colors. I think he did a great job with it. So yeah, I agree. Very cool stuff. All righty.
So everybody go try that next month.
Yeah, it is a good challenge for yourself to push yourself to do that. To push yourself to try the artist palette. It is an interesting challenge. All right, so next up, we've got Tebow's bust. This is one of my more favorite busts that's, you know, kind of ever been made. I think it's really wonderful. And I think this is a great execution on it. So many things here are done really well. He mentioned he's going for the chrome sword, which I think he does achieve. I love the teal color of the armor. Obvi, that's right in my wheelhouse, so I'm digging that. The tonal variation on the skin is really nice. The deep purples and crimsons and reds and those hues that are hidden in the skin make it just come alive. I think that looks wonderful. And finally, the hair, which does, like, we had a conversation earlier about hair on a bust. This is what I'm talking about, where we've got all these wonderful tones. And obviously this is, she's a little more of a redhead, or perhaps a very deep strawberry leaning blonde or something like that. But nonetheless, I still love the variation of what's going on in here as we catch light around the crown and the strands and have these deep, darker tones hidden within. So I think for the most part, all of that sells. I think the gold non-metallic looks good. I think the green reads right. The purple shadows you've reflected around, I think, are really interesting light pollution colors. I'd like to see maybe even a little more of it. Maybe some, like, you have a little bit in here. I'd love to see, like, this, whatever this is reflecting, I'd love to see some more of it reflecting down here or here as well, to just kind of carry that illusion all the way through. My biggest areas of challenge are, I'll start with a very subtle thing, which is her eyes aren't quite alive enough. They look so subtle. I need a little more pop to them, maybe a bigger light catch, something, maybe more variation in the whites of the eyes. They just, like, they're good. You have a lot going on here, but they just are so recessed for this model when everything else is so bright. you need to really make them alive and pop and catch probably a little more of, like, the striation around the iris.
I think pulling in the brightness from the sword and those blues and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like, almost like having a reflective light color down here at the bottom of the iris, right? To even really pop them out, and then a bright white dot on the reflection could be really nice. The other thing I'll say is we need to, again, highlight the T section up of the face a little more. So, like, take this area here a little brighter, this area here a little brighter, here, and here. You pushed it far. We need to go a little farther, to really, like, because and the problem here is you have to over highlight her face because you have this giant shard of white, right? Like, the chrome sword is awesome, but it draws so much attention that if you just relax your eyes and let them see where they look, like, don't focus on anything particular. Let's all do this challenge together. If you just stare at the picture and relax your eyes and don't focus on anything, what is the thing you still see? And I think everybody's going to answer it's the sword, right? Because the sword is so bright, which is fine. You just need to kind of over highlight the face to draw some attention back up and away from it. You can also trick the eye by taking your non-metallic gold and placing a couple bright highlights, like here and here and here on this brooch, to create a straight line that wants to keep the focal point of the T line of her face going straight up and down. Right? Like, that would be a good trick.
I like that idea a lot, actually.
So yeah, just little stuff like that. You could trick the eye into walking a line up toward the face by pushing the gold reflection line.
Is the shoulder pauldron too bright?
I don't think so. I think it's okay. Again, I think you've really got to fight this sword. Like, the sword is really cool and looks great, but you got to do so much to fight it, right? Because you've done something that just is sucking up all the attention on the model. It's not a bad thing. It is the classic challenge with this bust, by the way. Like, I see so many versions of this, and in many of them, the sword is, like, distracting, right? Because it is this huge, overwhelming piece that wants to be done in a different style than the rest of the mini, and so it can be a bit too attention grabbing. So just the quick other note, I think the biggest sort of letdown for me here is the cloak. That cloak is so flat, and, like, it has this, I don't know what's up with this texture. I assume that's, like, that's something in the the molded. Yeah, it's sculpted texture. I need to do, you need to do something with this. This feels so flat compared to the rest of this. So whether it's bringing that texture up, showing thread, you know, really putting some time in there to bring out the detail, this is the part that lets you down. Like, you have this gorgeous detail here, and then this big flat piece of like rubber is what it looks like over here. This is like, you, and I know you can do it, because if I look at the texture on the leather, this is sweet as. Like, you've captured so many little texture marks and stuff in the armor and in the sword and in the you know, in the leather. Like, this is just wonderful, wonderful texture captures here. Like, I love the detail that you brought out in all these areas. But then this is just flat nothing. The final thing I would say on the sword is it's good you worked in your yellow, ochre, browns, which is what you want when you're doing chrome. That shows that it's reflecting sort of the light pollution of the sun / you know, reflected kind of the brownness of the earth or whatever. You do want to try to smooth this out just a little more. I mean, you're not going to go back and do that obviously now, but I mean, like when you're doing this kind of reflection, you want it to be, you can use roughness to your advantage, but it needs to be kind of like purposeful roughness, like angular textured brush steel roughness. If you're going for like highly polished chrome, then every blend needs to be like as smooth as butter, because it's highly polished chrome, and it wouldn't have like hard lines in it, other than if it was reflecting something directly. Okay. Like straight reflections that are captured in the sword would have hard lines, but you haven't shown me a thing in the world that's being directly reflected here. So like, if you want to see an example of things being directly reflected in chrome, go look at like Kirill Kanayev's work, right? Where he's sort of a master of capturing hard reflections in chrome, and you can kind of get shapes and ideas of what he's reflecting on the surfaces that he uses. But as this is, I would like, as you've captured this here, it should be a smoother reflection. Final quick comment. I do like the green pollution up here in the top where it's reflecting the armor. Bringing that out a little, like it's a little too intense here and it doesn't come down far enough. A little bit of a subtler, lighten this up a little and drag it down some. And I that's excellent eye on that. All right. Anything else, or what else would you like to add, gentlemen?
No, my favorite idea of all that you said, and again, this is a tremendous piece of work, Thibaut. I'm gonna give it my early nod as pick of the month, just to steal that from you guys before you get to it.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, drawing the line down the center. So bringing those highlights from forehead down through chin, across that brooch and the hilt of the sword. I think that's a key point to this, to draw a line of focal points right down the center. Doing those highlights, I think, is a brilliant idea. So I just want to reinforce that, Vince. It was spot on.
Right on. Okay. Fantastic. Well, great stuff. Let's see. That brings us to another month end, and you know what that means. Yes, you've already cheated.
I did.
Pick yours, just fine. You sneaky person. No, that's okay. So Thibaut's your pick. Eric, have you got a pick?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that are fighting me for it. Thibaut's Stormcast are a contender, but the one that kind of strikes me and is Mihai's Morathi.
Sure.
From the distance that you have, even from a small pick, there's just such great transitions and the colors used and stuff that makes it a striking model from that distance. As he says, there's things that he, from a detail standpoint that some of these others don't have. But I think just kind of seeing something original this month, that one really stands out for me.
Ooh. Yeah, and you know what I remember about that one is he said that he did that in 4 hours, which is a mammoth triumph.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I'm overwhelmed this month, like, by just the quality of the submissions across the board. It is an embarrassment of riches this month. But my general pick, in the end, like, there's a lot of close ones. I like Surface Tension's Blood Angels Captain. I love Bleep Bloop's Chain Rasps. I like so much of this stuff that we had this month. The Nick Curtin Shadespire Cruise, like any of these would be perfectly fine choices. But in the end, you know what? I'm gonna give it to Liam Howell's Friendship is Magic Space Marine. I love that he went like it's glorious. He has these great creative colors. He used them in interesting ways. The glow on the eyes is sharp as all. You know, he's pushing himself on his metals and trying to get good color in there. I dig it. It's so different than every other Space Marine you see. You know, and you got to be a bold person to put a purple, pink, magenta, and, you know, sort of bright blue, teal Space Marine out in the world and go, here you go, world, take that. This is what I think is cool, and I think it is cool. So there you go.
Yep. And I would add to that it teaches us all that Care Bears can exist in the 41st millennium as well.
All right, indeed. So with that, we will come to a close. As always, some final wrap-up notes here. We love doing this, but as has been mentioned during the show and earlier, it is all of you who are commenting every month on every post, answering people, giving positive feedback, answering questions. That is the thing that keeps the lifeblood of this community strong. Keep answering those questions. Keep giving that positive, constructive feedback. It's amazing, the interaction and the engagement of the community, and I love it. You all make this community great every month, so thank you. If you want to join us on your hobby journey, down below there is a link. You can click that and join up. We would love to have you, whether you're, as you saw, many first-time submitters and, you know, relatively new painters, as well as people who've clearly been in the game for a while. And we welcome all skill levels. Everybody has their own next step to take on their hobby journey. I'll also mention that as of the time of us recording this, the final hobby, the awards for the hobby challenge video went up. That has drawn to a close. Congratulations to all the winners there. Thank you to all the participants. Congratulations to everybody who got it done and got a bunch of army stuff out and painted. Awesome. Whether it was a little or a lot, any success in the war against the gray is to be heralded. We have another hobby challenge coming up at the beginning of the year. That's when we'll start the new one once we transition into the new year. Yeah, gentlemen, anything else I missed that you wanted to touch on?
Keep the paint flowing.
There you go.
Yeah, going into well, we're going into December for next month, so that probably means a bunch of new toys for people. It probably means a bit of time off, so hopefully we see a flurry of paintbrushes, and then we can ring in the new year with another stellar month of PmP.
I agree. Yeah, December's always a big month, and then January follows right on after because you know, you got the extra time in December and the extra toys in January. So there you go. Look forward to seeing what we have. But as always, thank you very much for watching. It's deeply appreciated. Thank you to all of our wonderful submitters. You guys are all rock stars. Way to put it out there, way to paint something, and way to share with the world. So thank you for enriching all of our lives with your work. We appreciate it. And as always, we'll see you next time.